What aspect of the character's internal psychological torment during the core formation would you like emphasized most when we begin the writing phase? Behind the heavy wooden door, I took a long, deep breath, trying to steady the frantic rhythm of my heart. The anticipation was eating away at me, but a wave of relief washed over my mind. You finally came. To be completely honest, I'd been worried. Even if it was only a tiny, nagging bit of anxiety at the back of my mind, I couldn't help but think that something might have gone horribly wrong out there. But looking at the shadow looming just beyond the threshold, it looked like things had turned out all right after all. A wide, genuine grin spread across my face. I let out a relaxed voice and spoke. Come in. Bang! The door swung open with a heavy thud, and beyond the threshold, Godolph finally came into view. But the moment my eyes locked onto him, the smile died instantly on my lips. You, what's with your appearance? I couldn't help the sheer bewilderment leaking into my voice. The man standing before me looked less like a loyal servant and more like a corpse that had crawled its way out of a shallow grave. His cheeks were completely hollowed in, making his cheekbones protrude sharply. Thick, dark circles drooped black and heavy beneath his bloodshot eyes, casting an eerie shadow over his face. To make matters worse, his clothes were a complete, utter mess, caked with thick layers of dirt and dried dust, as if he had rolled through every ditch between here and his destination. Anyone who looked at him right now would think he'd been dragged through hell and back, bearing 1,000 tragic stories to tell. Godolph stared back at me, his face looking half dead, completely drained of life. When he finally opened his mouth, a hoarse voice, as if scraping rusted iron against iron, flowed painfully out of his throat. There were really so many things that happened. His lips quivered violently as he spoke, and there was a heavy, pathetic dampness in his voice, threatening to spill over into tears at any moment. At that exact look, I felt it instinctively. A sharp alarm went off in my head. That's going to take at least a few hours. I knew him too well. If I let him start talking now, if I gave him even the slightest opening, Godolph would pour out the entire saga of the last 3 days without stopping for a single breath. Under normal circumstances, if I'd had an abundance of time to spare, maybe I'd have sat down, poured a drink, and listened to his miserable little adventure. But right now, my situation was entirely different. I don't have time to listen to something like that. Even at this very second, this damned fragile body of mine was inching closer to death with every single moment that ticked by. It was a ticking time bomb. If I don't fix this broken shell as soon as humanly possible, I could drop dead any second without warning. My survival depended entirely on what he had brought back, not the bedtime story of how he got it. I waved my hands dismissively, cutting him off before he could launch into his grand monologue, and spoke with urgent firmness. Let's save that story for later. Just give me the item first. Godolph blinked his hollow eyes, looking completely crushed by my rejection. But still, shouldn't I at least tell you what happened? I said later. Why? You don't want to hear it. The misery in his voice instantly flared into indignant disbelief. I busted my ass for days out there. His eyes bulged wildly from their sunken sockets as he stepped forward, bringing his dirt-streaked face closer and closer to mine. It was oppressively, suffocatingly close. I could taste the dust radiating off his clothes. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead, and I instinctively turned my head aside to escape his intense glare. Later. It's urgent now. What's so urgent? Godolph grumbled, his face twisting into a stubborn pout. There's something. You're really too much. He shot me a bitter glare that felt absolutely packed with unspoken curses, but then he let out a long, defeated sigh. Here it is, the item you asked for. Reaching deep into the folds of his filthy robe, he carefully pulled out a small chest and handed it over to me. It was a plain wooden box, completely devoid of any unique carvings or ornamentation, but to me, it looked like a treasure chest. Let's see here. Click! I rubbed my hands together in eager anticipation and flipped open the latch, raising the lid. A soft light immediately illuminated my face. Inside the velvet lining, 7 potions emitting a vibrant, mesmerizing blue glow revealed themselves. My mouth went dry. I licked my dry lips and picked them out one by one, holding them up to the dim light of the room to check their contents. Swish, swish. Each time I gave the glass vials a gentle shake, the swirling blue particles inside floated about like miniature stars trapped in a liquid cosmos. Mana particles are clean. The color's not bad. They certainly weren't the finest, high-grade elixirs money could buy in a grand capital, but they were pure enough to be considered proper, high-quality merchandise. While it was a little disappointing that I had to work with standard goods, this was more than enough. With this amount of pure energy, I could at least attempt that. I gave a small, satisfied nod and looked up at my exhausted servant. You did well bringing them. Yeah, I had to do it well, Gadolf grumbled, puffing his chest out just a fraction as his grievances rushed back to the surface. I really scoured everywhere until I found the very best ones I could get. Yeah, you don't even know how much trouble I went through just to buy them. If I could just briefly tell you about that part. Right on cue, Gadolf's voice shifted back into that familiar, dramatic rhythm, building up the momentum for another long-winded speech. Tap. Before he could get a full sentence out, I stretched my arm straight out in front of me, planting my palm firmly against his chest to block him in his tracks. Later, I told you, I'm busy right now. Just 5 minutes. 5 minutes! Gadolf pleaded, his voice cracking desperately as he tried to lean past my hand. Can't you at least hear how many times your servant almost died? Nope. I didn't believe a single word of that 5 minutes pitch. 5 minutes would inevitably turn into 10. 10 minutes would easily become an hour, and my life was currently ticking away in seconds. Besides, the frantic, desperate light in his eyes right now didn't look like 5-minute eyes at all. Come on, I said I'll listen next time. You don't trust me? Young master, wait a moment. Please don't push. All right, out you go. Ignoring his weak resistance, I physically shoved Gadolf backward toward the hallway, moving him out of the room exactly as he was. Bang! I slammed the heavy door right in his face, shutting him out entirely. Then, without wasting a fraction of a second, I slid the iron bolt into place. Click! The latch locked firmly into the frame, sealing me inside my private sanctuary. A heavy sigh escaped my lips as I leaned my back against the solid wood. Sorry, Gadolf. In my heart, I really would have liked to hear you out, but I truly didn't have a single second to waste right now. I looked down at the wooden chest resting in my hands, my expression hardening into one of grim determination. Let's begin. I nodded to myself with a resolute expression. You had to strike while the iron was hot. The chance of survival was significantly higher if I forced this process through while my body still retained some lingering threads of strength. Walking over to the center of the room, I sat straight down on the hard floor and laid out the 7 potions Gadolf had brought, arranging them in a neat, meticulous row directly in front of me. I'll start with just one bottle. I uncorked the first vial, lifted it to my lips, and tilted it back. Gulp! Gulp! As I drank down the cool, luminous blue liquid, an icy, sharp sensation spread down my throat and into my chest. It was that unique, unmistakable feeling of fluid heavily saturated with raw mana. Under normal circumstances, if I just let it pass through me passively, a tiny fraction of the energy would be absorbed by the body, while the rest would be carelessly discharged as waste. But I was no ordinary amateur. I won't let a single particle slip away. I gathered every shred of my fractured will, focusing it entirely on the swallowed blue liquid. Come here, all of you. My entire body trembled violently as I pressed inward with all my strength, mentally squeezing my own internal organs, as if wringing the liquid dry from the inside out. Ah! A low groan escaped my clenched teeth. A little more. A harsh, cold shiver coursed through my veins, and thick beads of sweat began to break out across my deeply furrowed brow. Come to me, all of you. Bubble! Bubble! Deep within my stomach, the liquid churned violently under the absolute command of my will, emitting a brilliant blue light without pause. I forced the volatile energy to separate from the fluid, stripping it away particle by particle. How much time had passed since I began this grueling ordeal? Ha ha ha. Damn it! I panted heavily, my vision blurring for a moment. But there, drifting near my chest, a single blue wisp floated like a tiny speck of luminous dust. I had successfully extracted almost every single drop of pure mana from the first potion without any significant loss. This is unbelievably exhausting. Thump, thump. My heart pounded like a mad drum against my ribs, though all I had done was take the very first step. The road ahead of me was still dangerously long. Next. Bracing myself, I pushed through the fatigue. The brutal work continued. Gulp. Gulp. I drank down another mana potion, drew the raw energy out through sheer mental force, and sweated like rain. What kind of damned ordeal is this? By the time I had finally extracted the power from the seventh and final potion, my clothes were already damp. Ha ha. Done. Before my inner eye, 7 distinct clusters of vibrant light were now drifting inside my body. All that remained was the most perilous part, to compress and compress them again, shaping them into the definitive form of a core. The real part started right now. Up to this point, the worst consequence of failure would have been wasting the gold used to buy the potions. But from here on out, a single lapse in concentration, a single mistake, could send me straight to the afterlife. Let's go! I shut my eyes tight and clenched my teeth. You, come here. I drew one of the floating clusters of light over, carefully moving it down toward my lower abdomen. Then, I gathered every ounce of my will and began compressing it inward from all directions, forcing the loose energy to pack tightly together. I compressed it further and further, ensuring that not a single microscopic particle of energy could leak out. Ah! Crunch! Crack! My jaw clamped shut so hard that my teeth literally ground against each other until they cracked, and a metallic taste filled my mouth as blood seeped out between them. It was a vicious, invisible contest of strength between the wild mana that desperately tried to burst free, and my unyielding will that locked it down. You bastards! I'm Varlock. With a needle-sharp, suffocating focus, I allowed absolutely no gaps, no escape routes, and forced the expanding mana to stay trapped. The sphere, now shrunk down to the size of a tiny grain of millet, blazed with an even fiercer, denser light. Sizzle! A searing, agonizing heat rose abruptly from my lower belly, feeling exactly as if a white-hot iron skewer were being driven deep into my flesh. Damn it all! Every instinct screamed at me to leap into a bath of freezing cold water that very instant, but I held on. I held on and endured. Just a little more. And after I had endured that unspeakable agony for more than 10 agonizing minutes. Cough! I coughed violently, and blood streamed from my nose in a thin, hot red line, splattering onto my chest. At the same time, despite the pain, I bared my bloody teeth in a triumphant smile. That's one done. Because there, floating firmly near my lower abdomen, was a solid sphere no bigger than a fingernail. At last, I had succeeded in solidifying the first portion of mana. Keep pushing forward. My body felt completely broken, as if it were about to tear apart at the seams, but there was absolutely no stopping now. Like everything else in the world, this too was a matter of momentum. If I paused to rest, the foundation would crumble. You too, come here. This time, I boldly drew 2 more clusters of mana down to my lower abdomen. This time, make it bigger. I mentally spread the new energy out into a thin layer and began forming a new, encompassing sphere directly atop the solid one I had just made. It had to be precise. Not too thick, but not too thin either. Grrr. Again, I clenched my jaw, fighting to block the volatile mana that struggled to erupt outward like a volcano. Stay right there and solidify, you bastards. The sheer amount of mana had doubled now, and the mass that had already settled inside began to throw its weight around, interacting violently with the new layer and making control twice as hard. It felt exactly like walking a high-altitude tightrope with no safety harness. I'm gonna die from how exhilarating this is. The veins on my forehead bulged tightly against my skin. My complexion turned a deathly pale color, and the uncontrollable trembling in my body and heart grew worse by the moment. After dozens more minutes of excruciating focus passed, I exhaled deeply, wiping away the warm blood that soaked my chin and upper lip. This is the last one. If I could just finish this final step, even this pathetic wreck of a body would finally be usable again. Good, good. My lips curled back into a crooked, manic grin as I gathered the 4 remaining clusters of energy floating inside me. Let's go. I moved the massive cluster down to my lower abdomen and began to spread them out wide above the manospheres I had already layered in 2 tiers. Once more, I shaped the remaining mana into a larger final sphere, big enough to perfectly fill the empty severed cavity left behind where my original core had been brutally cut away in my belly. If I could complete this, the long-dormant mana circuits would activate, and the rotting, stagnant blood vessels would finally come back to life. I wrung out every last, hidden shred of energy from my soul and began shaping the final, outermost sphere. The amount of active mana had grown to nearly 4 times what it had been at the very start, and the surface area I had to control had widened just as much. Don't come out, you bastards. Like mole heads popping up wildly from underground, the compressed mana clusters writhed without rest, each one trying to assert its independence and break the formation. Get back in there. Just get back in there. The ones that slipped free were ruthlessly smacked back down by my will. The ones that tried to rise were pinned heavily in place. There's really no end to this. My whole body was completely soaked with sweat, and my head spun dizzily from lack of oxygen. My feeble, half-dead body had already reached its absolute physical limit and was screaming in pure protest. And then... Whoom! What's this? Suddenly, the old withered mana circuits clinging to my veins burst out in a violent, unexpected glow. Sensing the presence of a new anchor, they slowly began to drift toward the shifting manosphere I had just shaped. Thud. As if they'd been waiting for this exact moment for an eternity, the dead circuits latched onto the sphere all at once. In that instant, the outer sphere that had barely been holding its form began to shake violently under the sudden connection. Goork! A thick torrent of blood poured heavily from my mouth. That sudden, crushing shock had slammed my already scarecrow-like body even further into the dirt. Goddammit, I'm really going to die. Slosh! Slosh! Desperately gripping the churning, unstable manosphere from within, I clenched my teeth so hard I thought they might break into pieces. Hold on. No matter what, if I let go here, I'd really die. A strangled groan slipped out of my throat, and my skin turned a completely lifeless, translucent white. If it had been like walking a tightrope before, now it felt like trying to balance my entire weight on a single invisible thread. What did that mean? It meant it was unbearably, impossibly hard. Stay still, you bastards. How long did that desperate tug of war with the collapsing manosphere last? Wang! Wang! Little by little, the writhing, chaotic sphere began to calm down under my relentless pressure, and the old mana circuits embedded in my veins started seamlessly connecting with it, anchoring it firmly in place. Good, this way. Come this way. At last, the dead pathways each began to regain their lost light. Gurgle. The blocked, rotting veins finally started to carry fresh, oxygenated blood again. And finally, the newly constructed manosphere reached a perfect, serene state of absolute stability. Flash! My tightly shut eyes flew open, and I let out the breath I'd been holding in ragged, desperate gasps. A heavy, metallic reek of blood filled my mouth, and a foul, pungent stench rising off my entire body stung my nose. My muscles trembled so violently that I looked ready to collapse onto the floor at any moment, and my vision swam with dark spots. But still. It's done. A weary smile tugged at my lips. I could feel it clearly, vibrating with quiet power inside my lower abdomen. In the exact place where there had once been a gaping, hollow hole, there now rested a perfectly round, stable manosphere. It was far smaller in size compared to what I once possessed, but it was undeniable. The same kind of artificial core that bastard Shagrath had used was embedded in me at last. "Hey, you squid bastard, how about that?" I chuckled breathlessly into the empty room. If a freak like you could do it, of course I could do it too. A wide, triumphant grin stretched across my blood-stained face. Thump, thump, thump. "Young master, are you all right? Young master?" Suddenly, Gadolf's panicked voice called through the door, accompanied by the sound of him pounding the wood roughly with his fists. He must have run back over the moment he heard my agonized screams echoing down the hall. My smile softened slightly as I answered, trying to sound as reassuring as possible. "Yeah, I'm fine. Completely fine." "Really?" I heard strange noises coming from inside. "Are you sure you're not hurt somewhere again?" "That's not it." As I spoke, I happened to look down at my clothes, and my eyebrows knit together in an instant frown. I was utterly covered in a mixture of cold sweat and dark, coughed-up blood. It was a complete mess, and the stench of extracted bodily impurities was getting worse by the second. You'll have to help me for a bit." Help you with what exactly?" Gadolf's voice sounded thoroughly confused through the thick wood. "You'll see when you come in. First things first, I desperately needed to change out of these ruined clothes and wash myself from head to toe. I was so filthy I couldn't stand the sight or smell of myself for another second. Clack, creak. Pushing through the residual soreness in my limbs, I forced myself up, unlocked the iron latch on the door, and swung it wide open. And in that exact instant, Gadolf froze completely stiff in his tracks. His eyes went incredibly wide, and his jaw hung open so low it looked unhinged. I paid no mind to his shock and simply waved my hand dismissively. "Bring me some clothes and heat up water so I can bathe." "What are you doing?" I said, "Bring me some clothes." Why was this guy just standing there like a statue? I tilted my head, completely baffled by his catatonic state. Stepping forward, I grabbed Gadolf's rigid shoulder and gave him a firm shake. "Hey, hurry and get the clothes." Thud! Before I could even finish the sentence, Gadolf collapsed straight to the floor on the spot. Ku-ho-ho, kuh-huh-hook. White foam began bubbling rapidly out of his mouth, and his eyes rolled back until only the whites were showing. What the hell was wrong with him now? Hey, what's the matter? Get a hold of yourself." "Ghost," he wheezed. "What?" A ghost. What ghost?" And with those last strangled words escaping his foaming lips, Gadolf. Erg. Thunk. His head lolled heavily to the side, and he lost consciousness completely, slumping into a dead faint right at my feet. "Hey!" I stared down at him, entirely bewildered. What on earth was this? Why had he suddenly passed out cold after survived whatever hell he went through for the potions? Frowning, I reached down and lightly tapped Gadolf's pale cheek. "Hey, wake up, hey!" Step, step, step. Just then, the rapid sound of footsteps echoed from further down the hallway. I looked up to see a young maid standing down the corridor. She was holding a lit lantern, her eyes round with absolute horror as the light flickered across the space. "Oh, you came at the right time," I said, sighing with relief as I gestured toward the unconscious servant. "This guy just collapsed. Can you fetch a physician, or—" The moment I took a step toward her to explain. "Kya! Somebody help!" "Hey, wait, hey! Where are you going?" The maid let out a blood-curdling shriek, dropped her gaze, and bolted back down the corridor at full speed, leaving a literal trail of dust behind her. As her screaming faded into the distance, a sudden sinking realization finally dawned on me. Is there something wrong with the way I look? Was it just because I had a bit of blood on my clothes? Or because the smell was a little potent? Even so, I was the master of this house. Anyone should be able to recognize my face, right? This is strange. Frowning deeply, I walked over to a full-length mirror hanging a bit further down the corridor and peered at my reflection. Ah, shit, damn it. I jumped back slightly, my own heart thundering in my chest as my entire body trembled uncontrollably at the sight. Staring back at me from the glass was a monstrous entity. I looked as gaunt and bone-white as a literal skeleton, and my skin was violently smeared with thick, dark crimson blood from head to toe. Combined with the hollow, exhausted dark circles under my eyes and the horrific stench, I didn't look like a human being at all. I looked like a vengeful specter that had just brutally clawed its way out of the underworld. This is pretty extreme. I rubbed my forehead, letting out a wry, defeated chuckle. First things first, before the entire mansion armed themselves with pitchforks, I absolutely had to get cleaned up. Nodding grimly to myself, I touched my hollow, blood-caked cheek in the mirror, wondering how I was going to drag Gadolf into a bath with me. What specific aspect of the main character's internal reflections regarding his past life, as Varlock, would you like emphasized, when we begin writing the first part? The next day, early morning, found me trudging into the backyard of the Daphne mansion. It was a secluded spot where no one else was around, which was exactly what I needed. I carried a standard wooden sword loosely in my grip, its weight familiar yet foreign to this fragile new hand. Ha! A heavy, bone-deep sigh escaped my lips. How exhausting. The lingering fatigue from last night's excruciating ordeal still hadn't faded in the slightest. Dark circles hung heavy and black under my eyes, and I couldn't stop yawning as I walked. My body felt like lead, partly because I'd almost crossed over to the afterlife while forming the artificial core, but there was an even bigger, far more annoying reason for my sleep deprivation. A Lord Gadolf has collapsed. There's a ghost over there. A ghost appeared. Because of the completely unexpected ghost commotion that had erupted in the middle of the night, the entire estate had been thrown into a massive uproar. Seriously, it was a complete mess. The knights and retainers had frantically rushed over from their quarters, weapons drawn to catch the supposed ghost, and the entire mansion descended into utter, unmitigated chaos. I had found myself surrounded by panicked guards shouting nonsense. Begone, evil spirit. No, it's not an evil spirit. That's Harden. Harden. The knights were swarming everywhere, completely blind to reality in their panic. If things had gone just a little wrong, I might have been branded an actual evil spirit and physically exorcised by the Lord right then and there. What kind of ridiculous, backwards ordeal was this? I had to practically scream over their shouting, just to save my own skin. It's me, I'm not an evil spirit. Harden? In the end, I barely managed to explain to the bewildered crowd that I was, in fact, myself. The whole absurd incident was only wrapped up after I was dragged to the physician's quarters and forced to undergo a thorough medical examination to prove I wasn't possessed. Great, wonderful, a truly happy ending. If there was just one tiny problem with this outcome, it was that after dealing with all that ridiculous ruckus all night long, my physical exhaustion hadn't gone away at all. If my subordinates who had gone to the afterlife could see me now, Varlock, treated like a common alley hole, they'd have burst out laughing until their sides split. Damned bastards, I'd like to see them in my shoes. It wasn't as if there was any other way to fix this body. Still, well, at least I recovered my mana. A faint, victorious smile finally appeared on my face. The core I had earned through that wretched suffering was nestled quietly in my lower abdomen. Now, I had to properly confirm what kind of power it actually held, and whether it was as usable and responsive as a traditional mana circuit. In my heart, I had wanted to experiment with it right away last night, but if I'd done that, the chaos would never have ended. The thought of triggering another mansion-wide panic left me feeling strangely drained. I stared vacantly into the morning air, scratching my head as I reached the innermost part of the backyard. Is there really nothing easy in this world? The corners of my lips curled up into a smirk as my eyes landed on a massive, ancient tree planted firmly ahead of me. This should be just right. Its trunk looked incredibly thick, solid enough that I could beat on it with all my strength without having to worry about breaking it too easily. It was the absolute perfect target to test exactly how strong I was now. Let's do this. I stepped into the clearing, gripped the smooth handle of the wooden sword with both hands, and dropped into a low, balanced stance. Closing my eyes for a brief moment, I turned my awareness inward, carefully sensing the reservoir of energy resting in my lower abdomen. My mana capacity is around 1-star beginner. In this world, knight ranks usually ranged from 1-star to 5-star, and within each individual star, the proficiency was broken down into beginner, expert, and veteran levels. That meant the absolute volume of mana currently swimming in my body was no more than the baseline level of a newly awakened novice 1-star knight. Of course, considering I'd only just reawakened my mana a few hours ago, such a meager starting point was completely inevitable. Yet, after enduring that absolute ocean of torment, realizing the power I'd gained was only this much made a bitter sigh escape my lips. In the old days, I used to go around beating up even those 5-star bastards. Starting all the way back at the absolute bottom felt incredibly daunting. When in the world would I ever climb back up to that peak again? The road ahead felt so profoundly distant that another sigh slipped out of me, but I forced myself to shake it off. For now, even this much was something to be profoundly grateful for. After all, this was still infinitely better than dying an early death or being left as a pathetic invalid without any mana at all. Let's think positively. Normally, when ordinary people started training from scratch to reach a 1-star level, the time required was at least 6 or 7 grueling years. Some less talented individuals even spent up to a decade pounding away at the basics just to cross that threshold. Viewed through that lens, the fact that I'd achieved a stable 1-star core in a single night wasn't a bad accomplishment for my current age at all. All I have to do is keep getting stronger from here. Besides, my head was already filled to the brim with the profound subtleties of wave swordsmanship and the countless combat experiences of my past life. If I used all of that hidden knowledge as a foundation and pushed forward aggressively, I'd easily surpass my former self by the time I reached the same age as before. Is this what they call fighting against yourself or whatever? In any case, the important thing was to stop reminiscing and focus entirely on the present. I let out a sharp snort of air through my nose, clearing my mind of all distractions. All right, let's start by drawing out the mana. I concentrated my mind, focusing a sharp lens of intent onto the core in my belly, picturing the power flowing upward. Thump. My heart gave a sudden, powerful beat. Instantly, I felt a surge of raw energy rapidly spreading outwards, flooding throughout my entire body. A faint blue light pooled noticeably in my eyes, and a sudden, electric strength surged through every muscle fiber. Rigidization. It was a fundamental, basic technique commonly used by mana users of 1-star and above, reinforcing the entire physical body by infusing it directly with mana. Just by maintaining this state, a person's physical attributes grew several times stronger, creating a clear, unbridgeable distinction between a trained knight and an ordinary civilian. The mere fact that a blue light was currently glowing from my eyes was definitive proof of being a true mana user. With a normal wooden sword, a weakling wouldn't be able to leave a single scratch on that thick bark. But if I applied rigidization properly, at the very least, it should have the impact of a heavy axe strike. Tot. Manjo second style demon whale, horizontal slash. I stepped forward fluidly, transferring the weight from my hips into my shoulders and forcefully swept the wooden sword sideways. At first, the blade moved out slowly, but in an instant, exactly at the apex of the arc, the flow of mana twisted violently and burst forth. It was a motion I had performed tens, if not hundreds of thousands of times in my past life. The wooden sword followed that perfect trajectory and struck the solid trunk of the tree. Tack! With a dull, hollow thud, the wooden sword was pathetically blocked by the dense wood. I blinked, slowly withdrawing the weapon to check the point of impact. There wasn't even a faint scratch on the rough bark, let alone a deep, splintered gouge like an axe strike would leave behind. Huh? What is this? I tilted my head in absolute bewilderment. This was incredibly strange. I was absolutely certain I had executed the technique correctly. I had sent the mana down my arm and put my strength into the swing properly. Tack! Tack! What the hell? I tried swinging the sword again, and then once more, but the results didn't change in the slightest. This is right, isn't it? Like shooting threads from the mana circuit, huh? What was going on? Why wasn't it working the way it was supposed to? Tack, tack, tack. I lost track of how many times I had swung the sword by now, the hollow wood-on-wood echoes filling the quiet backyard. Bullshit? Like water trapped inside a heavily heated kettle, my temper began to simmer slowly. Tack, tack. Each time I swung, the frustrating heat in my forehead rose higher, and the harsh vibrations traveling up the hilt made my hands grow completely numb. But utterly unable to accept this bizarre reality, I kept repeating the motion, swinging like a madman for a long time. Why? Why is this happening? At last, the boiling, volatile heat inside my chest completely erupted. In that exact split second, along with the distinct, terrifying sound of something bursting violently inside my gut, an incredibly hot sensation suddenly flooded outward from my lower abdomen. Huh? Why was this happening all of a sudden? Hup! Before I could even comprehend the change, my sword accelerated entirely beyond my control, tearing through the air without restraint. The moment the wooden tip touched the massive tree, quad-geek, the fragile wooden sword sliced straight through the thick trunk like a hot knife through butter, emerging effortlessly on the other side while emitting a white burst of scorching steam. What the hell? My jaw dropped. Why had a blunt wooden sword just pierced completely through a solid tree? While I stood there blinking in sheer, unadulterated bewilderment, a loud, ominous cracking sound echoed. Joke! The massive tree right in front of me began tipping closer and closer toward my head. It was about to fall over. God damn it. Kong! I reflexively leaped out of the way, throwing my body into the dirt just as the colossal trunk crashed down with a deafening boom onto the exact spot I had been standing a second ago. I almost turned into human jerky. Panting heavily, I looked at the devastation. What the hell was that just now? I had cut down a whole tree with a single strike, and with a wooden sword, no less? I stared blankly at the wooden weapon in my hand, completely dazed. It didn't make any sense. Crouching down in front of the fallen trunk, I carefully inspected the stump left behind. The outer surface wasn't neatly sliced. It had been roughly torn apart, blasted through by sheer, overwhelming force. It really does look like I did this. This was bizarre. No matter how perfectly I executed rigidization, it shouldn't have been anywhere near this destructive at my current 1-star level. The total amount of mana in my body had obvious rigid limits. No matter how skilled I was or how much past life experience I possessed, the most I could do was efficiently use the mana I currently had. I couldn't just magically create more out of thin air. Let's try it again. Snapping out of my daze, I shook off the confusion, grabbed the sword once more, and took my stance. This time, I aimed at a completely different tree, one about half as thick as the one I'd just felled. Hop! I channeled my focus, attempting to recreate the feeling from a moment ago. Just like before, make the mana erupt from within. Boom! Clenching my teeth, I swung the sword with all my might. Tuck. But the sword was stopped flat, pathetically blocked by the bark again. I couldn't even scratch the surface, just like my very first attempts. Why is it doing this again? I ran a hand through my hair, utterly frustrated. I had absolutely no idea what the reason was. Ush! Psh! Each time I swung, it felt tantalizingly close. Something felt like it was about to burst out from my gut, but then the energy would violently fizzle away right before reaching the blade. Why am I this exhausted? All I did was swing the sword a few times. My chest heaved, and a wave of deep fatigue washed over me. It felt like I was already completely running out of mana. Even considering how worthless and unconditioned this new body was, this was far too soon. Just as my breath rose up to my throat, and my legs began to feel heavy, a sudden, blinding thought flashed through my mind. Could it be I froze as the realization hit me. Did I burn up all my mana in that single strike just now? Wait, I'd better check. I quickly closed my eyes and examined my internal core. My suspicions were confirmed instantly. The reservoir of mana it had held just a few minutes ago was completely drained, dry as a desert. So that meant I'd accidentally unleashed every single drop of my energy in that one swing that felled the first tree. This is a bit very different from a mana circuit, isn't it? What the hell was this system supposed to be? A mana circuit was like a faucet you could turn to control the flow, but this thing felt like a detonator. It was strange. Way too strange. While I stood there stroking my chin, completely absorbed in analyzing my broken body, distant shouts broke the morning silence. Over here. That sound came from over here. Yes, over there. It was the voices of the mansion's servants shouting in the distance, likely drawn by the thunderous crash of the falling tree. For now, I should get out of here. If I got caught standing over a felled tree with a wooden sword in my current state, it'd only turn into another massive, exhausting hassle. Without hesitation, I turned on my heel and dashed off in the exact opposite direction of the echoing voices, slipping into the shadows of the estate. A short while later, I found myself in a remote, overgrown thicket where no one else was around. Several smaller trees around me had been completely smashed to pieces during my frantic trials, and I sat calmly at the center of the wreckage, taking slow, deep breaths. To recover, I began utilizing the unique cultivation method of wave swordsmanship, known as the blue hole. It was an advanced technique designed to absorb ambient mana from nature. Every time I inhaled, the sparse mana scattered in the surrounding air clung to my skin and was quickly drawn into my body, rushing straight down to replenish my core. That rhythmic process repeated for some time as the minutes ticked by. Flash! I snapped my eyes open, a faint, knowing smile playing on my lips. Now I've got a rough idea. After spending several grueling hours, trying all sorts of nonsense out here in the woods, I had finally grasped the fundamental differences between this artificial core and a standard mana circuit. First of all, there was a staggering difference in the speed at which mana was emitted and absorbed. Tack! I snapped my fingers sharply. Instantly, a bright blue flame shot up from the tip of my thumb. See? It hadn't even been that many hours of cultivation, and I'd already recovered this much usable energy. With a traditional mana circuit, a knight had to consciously draw in external mana for ages just to replenish their reserves, but this core thing pulled mana in entirely on its own. Furthermore, when I actively used a cultivation technique like the blue hole, the recovery speed multiplied several times over. The core itself felt like a vacuum, aggressively drawing in mana from the outside world. Now I get why that squid bastard was so strong. It clicked. This autonomous recovery was precisely the reason Shagrath had been able to attack endlessly back then, like a wellspring that never dried up no matter how much mana he burned through. Of course, there was a decisive, tragic difference between me and him right now. The size of the core. His core was so colossally massive it was like stuffing an entire estate inside his body. That was why he could absorb a torrent of mana simultaneously. Compared to that grand fortress, mine was honestly no bigger than a tiny rat pellet. Well, it's still not bad. Even at this microscopic size, it was several times faster at recovering mana than an ordinary mana circuit. The real, terrifying problem, however, lay elsewhere. When I released the mana, I balled my hand into a fist and slammed it into the dirt beneath me. Koong! The ground dented deeply, leaving a clear, compressed imprint of my hand, and a wisp of hot steam began to rise from the soil. Whoo! This was the issue. The core's mana output speed was too fast, far too fast. If I had to compare it to regular knight techniques, it was like going from shooting a small, manageable bow to firing a giant, volatile ballista. So, was that a good thing? Well, the raw power itself was fine. The faster the output, the stronger the attack. The problem was that it now took an absurd amount of strength and mental fortitude to fire off even a single ballista bolt. Controlling the output felt ridiculously difficult, like trying to dance on slippery ice while wearing heavy armor. Whew, out of breath again. I panted softly, wiping a fresh layer of sweat from my forehead. If I couldn't figure out how to manage and regulate this explosive power properly, I'd collapse from sheer exhaustion in the middle of a real fight. Even I, Varlock, who had mastered 100 techniques, was struggling with this precise mana control. Still, if I wanted to find some kind of silver lining in this mess, I think this could actually be a perfect match with wave swordsmanship. One of the core principles of wave swordsmanship was the fluid circulation and containment of force. It specialized in making the most efficient, calculated use of any mana at your disposal. If I could seamlessly blend that specialized containment with the core's ability to discharge mana at lightning speed, I'd definitely be able to create a terrifying synergy. So then, maybe this isn't so bad? A strange, burning certainty suddenly welled up from deep within me. It was a power that currently rampaged like a mad dog, completely wild and unrestrained. But if I could just learn to tame it and control it properly, I felt an intense conviction that I could become far stronger than I had ever been in my past life as Varlock. The corners of my lips slowly curled upward into a dark grin. You damn squid, I'll make good use of your power. With this very core, I'd eventually devour the entire empire. Shagrath could watch me from the afterlife and grind his teeth in pure, useless frustration. I nodded firmly to myself and rose to my feet, brushing the dirt off my knees. All right. Well, I had done enough performance testing for the morning. What should I do next? Even a 1,000-mile journey started with a single step. Now that I've successfully taken that first step and secured my power, I had to decide what came after. I scratched my chin, falling deep into thought as I began walking back toward the mansion. First of all, I should at least inform everyone that I've recovered my mana. I could tell by how everyone in this estate acted around me. This body, hardened Daphne, was regarded as nothing better than useless trash by almost everyone. Just revealing the presence of a 1-star core alone would be enough to regain some of their lost confidence and shut their mouths. Though simply announcing it is a little boring. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for a grand return. If I could make the reveal impactful, like bam, the psychological effect on the household would be much greater. Should I say it during a formal family council meeting? Or, honestly, part of me just wanted to march straight into the training grounds, challenge the knights, and beat every single one of them half to death. Thinking of how those bastards used to smirk and laugh at my pathetic state made me want to split their skulls in two. Besides, swallowing up the knights through martial force and using them as a loyal foundation to rebuild the house rapidly could be an effective way to restore the family name. However, that won't work. I stopped in my tracks and closed my eyes for a moment, carefully recalling a conversation I'd had with Gadolf. The current knight commander? That would be Sir Moljibizin. And what kind of person is he? I don't know him well myself, but he's served our house faithfully for over 30 years. He has a good reputation, and the Lord trusts him deeply. But why do you ask about Sir Moljibizin? I slowly shook my head, abandoning the thought. There was an old knight who had devoted over 30 years of unwavering loyalty to this ruined, penniless house, and I was just going to move in and forcibly snatch his position through a brute force challenge? If I did that, the people's trust would vanish. Even for someone as reckless and aggressive as me, that wasn't a viable long-term option. Power without respect was just tyranny. A dozen different ideas rose and fell in my head. Clasping my hands behind my back, I let out a deep sigh and resumed walking down the main path. As I approached the edge of the estate, I noticed something unusual. What's this? Just ahead, I spotted Gadolf and a few house servants gathered in the middle of the path. They were huddled close together, murmuring nervously and glancing toward the front gates. I walked right up behind Gadolf and asked bluntly, "What are you doing here?" "Ya, young master." Gadolf jumped, turning around with wide eyes. "Where have you been all this time?" "Why? Is there some problem?" "There is, a very big problem." "So, what is it?" Unlike me, who felt completely indifferent to whatever daily drama was unfolding, Gadolf looked ready to pass out from pure anxiety. His hand shook as he pointed dramatically back toward the main courtyard of the mansion. Someone has come from the Calpion Viz County. Calpion Viz County? I repeated, the words tasting foreign on my tongue. Who's that? That name, I felt like I'd heard it somewhere before. Why did it sound so strangely familiar? While I struggled to comb through the blurry, fragmented memories of the original hardened Daphne, Gadolf stared back at me, like he couldn't believe his own ears. You don't remember even that? No. You used to say over and over that their house was our family's vassal, until our ears bled. Vassal house? In that exact instant, my eyes went perfectly round. Would you like me to emphasize the crushing weight of the historical irony I feel regarding the reversal of roles between our houses when we begin writing the first part? I awakened from my deep thoughts, a sudden rush of clarity breaking through the fog of my fragmented memory. I blinked, the pieces fitting together at last as I muttered under my breath. I remembered. The Calpion Viz County. Those bastards. The memories came flooding back, sharp and vivid. In the past, I had personally given them swordsmanship lessons a few times, and our family had even gone so far as to financially support them at the highest level. They had been so hopelessly, fundamentally untalented that I distinctly recalled struggling immensely just to teach them the absolute basics. Those frustrating tutoring sessions remained clear as day in my mind. But those guys became a Viz County? I couldn't help but marvel at the bitter irony of it all. In the span of a mere 80 years, while my own house had plummeted drastically from a glorious duchy down to a struggling Viz County, those ungrateful bastards had somehow climbed the aristocratic ladder instead. Well, looking at it through a positive lens, I suppose it wasn't completely in vain that I had spent my time helping them climb out of mediocrity back then. The problem is that we fell. The stark reality of our current situation hit me, dampening any fleeting sense of pride. I crossed my arms across my chest, my expression turning serious as I looked at my nervous servant and asked, "So, why did those bastards come?" "They probably came because of the debt issue," Gadolf answered, his voice dropping to a cautious whisper. At his words, my eyes narrowed slightly, a bad feeling twisting in my gut. "Debt? What debt?" "I heard we co-signed a debt somewhere, and it went bad." "Co-signed?" A wave of pure disbelief washed over me. "We even ended up in debt to Calpion?" "Yes, that's what I heard," Gadolf confirmed, nodding gloomily. My brow furrowed deeply, the sheer incompetence of this current lineage giving me a pounding headache. They really pulled every kind of stunt, didn't they? To think the descendants of the great Daphne line were reduced to being financially choked by their former subordinates. I scratched my forehead roughly, trying to suppress my rising irritation, and asked again, "How much do we have to repay?" "I don't know the exact amount." I went silent, staring into space. It was truly one mountain after another. I had barely managed to keep us alive by forcibly forging an artificial core last night, and now I wake up to find out the house is drowning in debt? Oh God, Farron, just how far are you going to test me? I let out a long, heavy sigh, attempting to bleed off the compounding stress, and then firmly shook my head. Still, it's not the worst. If the collectors were from Calpion, a family that was once nothing more than our loyal vassals, I should be able to leverage that history somehow. I ought to be able to handle them. I scratched my cheek, settling my resolve, and casually waved my hand to dismiss Gadolf's hovering presence. "Move aside." Gadolf blinked at me, looking entirely caught off guard by my sudden movement. "You're going to go in? Why are you even asking something so obvious?" I snapped, stepping forward. But great young Master Donfell is inside," Gadolf stammered, frantically reaching out to stop me. "It would be better if you didn't run into him." I paused, turning my head. "Who's that?" "You don't remember him either." Gadolf's eyes went wide with startlement. I said, "Who is it?" Gadolf explained, his eyes practically popping out of his head as he lowered his voice even further. "Who else? He was your classmate at the academy, the master of serpent swordsmanship, Great young Master Donfell. You don't remember? Academy classmate, I muttered, mulling over the title. Then we must have gotten along well. The moment the words left my mouth, a look of profound, unadulterated bewilderment flickered in Gadolf's eyes. He looked at me as if I had suddenly sprouted a second head. Why on earth was he making that face? Are you joking right now? What? You don't remember? Gadolf swallowed hard, his face turning pale. What he did to you. Stop beating around the bush and just say it. Gadolf took a sharp breath, speaking in a tone that sounded utterly incredulous that I could ever forget such a thing. He's the one who shattered your mana circuits. Even if you forget everything else, you should remember that. Huh? My mind ground to a screeching halt. What kind of absolute utter bullshit was this now? My face twisted mercilessly into a mask of pure cold rage. A little later, I stepped into the grand lobby of the Daphne mansion, my eyes sweeping over the scene. In the middle of the lobby, a dozen or so men dressed in crisp chestnut-brown uniforms stood in a tight, silent formation. Facing opposite them were the Daphne retainers. The two groups were divided evenly, with the grand marble statue of the Wave Knight serving as the exact midpoint between them. A subtle, suffocating tension hung heavily in the air as both sides stared each other down, their eyes hardened with mutual hostility. Standing in a shadowed corner of the lobby, I leaned closer to Gadolf and whispered coldly, "So, which one is the bastard who stabbed me in the gut?" "Over there, you see that tall man in the back?" Gadolf whispered back, his finger trembling slightly as he pointed into the crowd. "That's him. That's the great young master." My gaze followed where Gadolf pointed. Positioned near the rear of the Calpion delegation, a man stood with his massive arms crossed tightly over his chest. His hair stuck straight up like a rooster's comb, and he possessed a towering, monstrous height that easily cleared 2 meters. Because of his ridiculously bulging muscles, the chestnut uniform he wore looked as though it were about to burst at the seams. He had a completely expressionless, stoic face, dominated by large, unblinking eyes that seemed designed to pierce right through his opponent. It felt as though a giant, living gargoyle, not a human being, was standing there, effortlessly exuding a strange, heavy sense of physical oppression over the entire room. He looks pretty strong," I muttered, sizing him up with a critical eye. "He really is extremely strong," Gadolf murmured, his voice laced with genuine dread. "How strong?" I heard that. Among the knights around here in his age group, there isn't anyone who compares to great young Master Donfell. He wouldn't have earned the nickname Steel Serpent for nothing. Steel Serpent? What the hell kind of nickname is that? I scoffed, tilting my head at the absurd title. How would I know that? Gadolf replied under his breath. Anyway, you're saying I was classmates with that bastard? Yes, I heard you were classmates at Windrun Knight Academy. Windrun Knight Academy. I mulled over the unfamiliar name for a moment, trying to dig up any hidden remnants of the original Harden's memories. Then, a logical thought occurred to me, and I asked, then, before I lost my mana, I must have been quite strong too? If I faced off against a guy like that. Faced off? Gadolf looked back at me with a face that clearly said, don't joke. He let out a breathless, disbelieving huff. There's no way that happened. Huh? What do you mean? You didn't have a duel or anything, Gadolf explained bluntly. You just got beaten up. Huh? Beaten up? My voice dropped. Yes. You got hit for interrupting great young Master Donfell's training, didn't you? Really? When Gadolf silently and solemnly nodded his head, a wave of profound mortification washed over me. I let out a sharp sigh and pressed my palm hard against my forehead, closing my eyes in sheer disbelief. A descendant of the great Daphne line, getting casually beaten up by some pathetic vassal family bastard? And it wasn't even a proper, honorable duel. Oh God, just what kind of weak, pathetic loser have you reincarnated me into? Seriously, I could die of absolute shame right here on the spot. While I was aggressively rubbing the back of my nape to soothe my soaring blood pressure, Donfell's large eyes shifted. He silently looked over toward our corner, locked onto me, and twisted one side of his mouth into a strange, mocking smile. the sharp corner of his mouth, contrasting sharply with his otherwise blank, stoic face, looked somehow grotesque. "Hey," I whispered, my eyes narrowing into slits. "Did he just smile at me?" "Seems like it," Godolph muttered nervously. "He was mocking me, wasn't he?" "Probably." "That bastard." My face crumpled into an expression of pure, unadulterated rage. Without another word, my feet moved on their own, and I started to march directly toward Donfell to teach that overgrown serpent a lesson. But before I could cross the midpoint of the lobby, a loud announcement cut through the tension. "The Lord is coming out." A retainer rushed into the lobby and bowed his head deeply. Right behind him, the current head of our house, Viscount Cobalt, walked out to meet our guests. "You've come a long way, great young Master Donfell," Cobalt said, his tone carrying the forced politeness of a nobleman under financial duress. "Yes, it has been tiring." Donfell didn't even bother to bow. He merely curled his lip into a thin, fishy smile. Cobalt's brow twitched slightly at the blatant disrespect, but he held his temper and replied, "We'll send the money over ourselves next time, so you don't have to come all this way every time." "It's fine," Donfell replied shortly. His voice was dry, clipped, and completely devoid of emotion. "I'm not the type to trust others." Hearing that, Viscount Cobalt's jaw visibly tightened, and my own eyebrow began to quiver with an explosive irritation. What's with that bastard's arrogant attitude? Even if I generously chose to overlook him, acting all high and mighty in front of the lord of the house, his words were an open insult. What did he mean he can't trust us? So basically, he was standing in our own lobby and declaring that we were so incompetent and untrustworthy that we couldn't even manage to deliver a payment properly? Absolute bullshit. Just as I scoffed quietly to myself, prepared to intervene, one of the Calpion retainers, standing at the front of their line, stepped forward, breaking the silence as he cleared his throat loudly. "Ahem!" The man pulled out a ledger and spoke with a smug, demanding air. "The installment repayment due from Daphne today is a total of 30,000 gold, including principal and interest. After today, the remaining debt will be 370,000 gold. Please prepare the funds." "Wait a moment," Cobalt replied, keeping his composure. "The repayment will be brought shortly by the third young master." "Yes," the Calpion retainer replied, nodding condescendingly. 30,000 gold just for today's payment, and the remaining debt was 370,000 gold? The moment those astronomical numbers reached my ears, my eyebrow twisted violently in sheer shock. Gadolf. "Yes, young master." "How many times have those bastards come here to collect?" "About 4 or 5 times, I'd say." "So, they've already wrung more than 100,000 gold out of us?" I'm not that good with numbers, but if they had already collected that much and we still owed 370,000, that must mean the initial debt we owed those parasites was somewhere around a staggering 500,000 gold. I'm going to lose my mind. The trap was entirely obvious. Our family was completely buried under an avalanche of debt, and every single scrap of liquid wealth the estate generated was getting sucked into paying off the predatory interest. No wonder the physical state of the mansion and the grounds was a complete, impoverished disaster. I scratched my forehead roughly, my mind racing as I asked again, how the hell did this family even end up in debt to a vassal house in the first place? "I already told you," Godolph whispered, looking distressed. "We signed the wrong guarantee." "I mean, what specific guarantee?" Gadolf rolled his eyes toward the ceiling, quickly sorting through his memories before speaking. There was this wealthy merchant guild, called the Winter Merchant Guild, that used to work closely with us. The guildmaster over there borrowed a massive sum of money from the Calpion family, used our name as a guarantee, and then ran away with the funds. So now we're stuck repaying those bastards' debt instead? Yes, exactly. I stared at the floor, completely speechless. That muscle-brained bastard, the great young master of Calpion, had brutally shattered a direct descendant's mana circuits with his bare fist. And now, some cowardly merchant guilds, debt that our idiot ancestors guaranteed was being ruthlessly collected from our blood money. I'm seriously going to lose my mind. If nothing else, one thing was glaringly clear. Those Calpion bastards had absolutely zero intention of remembering or repaying any of our past historical favors. They were here to bleed us white. Young master. What? Godolph cautiously edged closer to me, his shoulders hunched as he murmured. Could I have a word in private? What is it? I stepped back slightly into the shadow of a pillar, tilting my head to hear Godolph's frantic whisper. I'm just asking to be sure. Say it. You remember the money you gave me before? To buy the mana potion. Ah, that? What about it? I asked, completely unbothered. Please don't take this the wrong way when I say this, he stammered, sweat starting to bead on his forehead. What are you getting at? You didn't take that money from the house vault, did you? I stared at him, my tone completely nonchalant. The house vault? What's that? You know, there's that safe in your room, young master. How did you know about that? You're serious? You actually took it from there? Yeah, I did. In that exact moment, a thick sheet of sweat broke out across Godolph's face, and his entire body began to tremble like a leaf in a storm. What's wrong with you? I asked, frowning at his sudden panic. Young master, you're not joking, right? I told you, I'm not. Then, aren't we in big trouble now? What do you mean? I'm going to earn it back little by little and fill it again. That's not the problem, he hissed under his breath. Then, what is? The money the third young master said he was coming to collect. It's gone now, isn't it? Huh? My mind went completely blank. Is that how it works? My eyes grew as big as lanterns, and my mouth fell wide open. The gold I had so casually spent to forge my artificial core was the exact 30,000 gold meant to pay off the Calpion family today. Meanwhile, in the center of the room, Donfell stood with his massive arms crossed over his chest, exhaling a heavy, bored breath as he looked around the room. From the lord down to the retainers and the stationed knights, everyone who looked at him had eyes filled with a distinct, lingering fear. Too easy, like twisting a child's wrist. Donfell sneered internally. He really couldn't understand why his father was so utterly obsessed with this pathetic, declining house. He stroked his chin, calmly recalling the words his father had impressed upon him before his departure. Donfell, no matter how far Daphne has fallen, Daphne is still Daphne. We must absolutely use them as our stepping stone. Daphne once being our master, and back when those bastards still had something worth taking from them. To the current Donfell, that was all just a distant, irrelevant story that everyone had long since forgotten. Having to even stand here today facing these lesser people was nothing more than a bothersome, tedious chore. Donfell broke the silence, directing his gaze coldly at Viscount Cobalt. It's taking quite a while. Wait a moment. They'll be here any second, Cobalt replied, a flicker of embarrassment crossing his face. It's already been 10 minutes. As an awkward, strained expression rose on Viscount Cobalt's face, Donfell's mouth curled faintly upward into a mocking sneer. A lord, how pathetic. In the suffocating, deathly silence that followed, no one dared to speak. We waited, the tension stretching thin over the course of several agonizing minutes. They're here. At someone's sudden shout from the back, all the retainers sharply turned their eyes toward the grand staircase. Down the steps, my older brother Malion, the third young master, was finally seen coming down. But there was one incredibly strange thing about his entrance. For some reason, Malion's face looked utterly blank, almost completely hollowed out of life. His shoulders hung completely limp, and at a single glance, anyone in the room could see that something was catastrophically wrong. What's with that expression? Huh? Did something happen? While the retainers exchanged puzzled, anxious looks, the third young master walked right past them, coming to a halt directly in front of the lord. Malion, why are you so late? Cobalt demanded, his patience wearing thin. The thing is... Enough. Just hand over the money quickly. Malion squeezed his eyes shut in sheer agony, then opened them, nervously adjusting his glasses as he finally forced the words out. It's gone. What do you mean by that? The vault, the money has disappeared. A brief, terrifying silence descended upon the entire lobby. What did you say? Viscount Cobalt's eyes widened to the size of saucers. Don't joke around. This is no time for that. It's true, Malian cried out, his voice cracking. The vault, it was completely empty. I don't understand how this happened. Did you check thoroughly? Yes, I looked over it several times, but there was absolutely nothing. How is that possible? Money doesn't just grow legs and walk away. Where could it have gone? In an instant, the entire lobby froze over, turning deathly cold. Meanwhile, back in our quiet corner of the lobby. We're doomed. I watched as Gadolf practically began dripping cold sweat from his forehead. I couldn't help but think to myself, Lord, money actually does have legs. And right now, those legs are named Hardin. The money disappeared? Good heavens, how can this be? As the entire lobby abruptly erupted into a chaotic storm of frantic murmurs, Cobalt sharply turned his head toward the guard line and spoke with absolute gravity. Commander Muljibson. Yes, my lord. You search for it. We have no time to lose. Understood. The old commander hurried up the stairs with a squad of men, but deep down, I knew the ultimate result wouldn't change. When Muljibson returned a little while later, his face was grim as he approached the lord. The third young master was entirely right. What? Cobalt gasped. We searched every single inch of the quarters, left absolutely nothing unturned. But there was no money to be found. What kind of ridiculous nonsense is this? Where in the world could it have gone? There were clear traces of the lock being forced, Muljibson reported, his voice dropping low. What do you mean by that? I believe a highly skilled thief may have broken in. A thief? You're telling me a thief managed to infiltrate our estate? Cobalt's voice grew incredibly rough, his anger rising to a fever pitch. Beside me, Gadolf was trembling violently from head to toe. Pale as a freshly bleached sheet, he stared straight at me with wide, panicked eyes and whispered, What do we do, young master? What do you mean? What do we do? I muttered back, trying to keep a straight face. Wouldn't it be better to confess everything now? That way, you might at least save your life from the Lord's wrath. Hold on, let me think for a moment, I snapped quietly, rubbing my temples. Damn it all, this was getting incredibly complicated. How the hell was I supposed to know that the stash of gold I casually looted was the exact money we needed to pay off these Calpion bastards? Just my absolute goddamned luck. Meanwhile, the utter confusion in the middle of the lobby only grew worse by the second. Just whose doing is this? Who would dare rob the Daphne family? We'll search the perimeter as well. Viscount Cobalt's voice grew louder and louder, his face twisting up in a mixture of profound rage and deep humiliation. Retainers were running everywhere in a blind panic, and on the faces of the Calpion men watching the spectacle unfold, cruel little smirks began to appear. They were clearly enjoying our disgrace. How could this have happened? Viscount Cobalt, his face entirely flushed a deep red, spun around in a circle, scanning the surroundings for anyone acting suspicious. And in that split second, his sharp gaze locked directly onto Gadolf. Cobalt muttered, his eyes narrowing. Tremble, tremble, tremble. The moment the Lord's eyes hit him, Gadolf's legs began to shake uncontrollably. Ha! Ha! Clack, 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 clack. His teeth began to chatter violently against each other, the sound practically echoing in our quiet corner. Thick streams of sweat poured down his pale, entirely drained face. Viscount Cobalt's eyebrow twitched with a dark, sudden realization as he stepped toward us and spoke. Gadolf, could it be? I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, realizing the gravity of the situation. I'm screwed. We are really, truly screwed. Sweat was pouring from Gadolf's forehead like a waterfall now, and his shaking absolutely wouldn't stop. What specific aspect of the tension between the main character and his brother Malian should be highlighted most when we begin writing the first part? Gadolf was trembling right beside me, sweating so profusely It looked as if he were caught in a sudden downpour of pouring rain. Seeing his pathetic state, Viscount Cobalt shot him a sharp gaze absolutely brimming with sudden suspicion and asked coldly, "Gadolf, was it you who touched the money?" "Huh? No way." Gadolf stammered, letting out a forced, incredibly awkward laugh that only sealed his guilt further. "Then why are you sweating so much? And that expression? That's, well, thunk." Before the idiot could blabber something irreversible, I kicked Gadolf hard with my foot under the cover of our cloaks, and moved my lips silently, locking eyes with him. "Hey, don't say anything." "Huh?" But Gadolf shot me a desperate glance. The situation was already grave enough without him making it worse. As the two of us frantically exchanged these highly suspicious glances right in front of everyone, Viscount Cobalt furrowed his brow deeply and asked again, his irritation flaring, "What are you doing, Hardin?" "Huh? What do you mean?" I replied, instantly feigning utter ignorance. "I'm the one asking questions here. Gadolf, answer me." Cobalt roared, completely ignoring my deflection. Answer. Roll. Roll." Gadolf's eyes darted around like trapped mice as he nervously looked back and forth between the two of us. "If I talk, I'm dead." I shaped the desperate words with my mouth again, glaring at him. "Speak, Gadolf." Viscount Cobalt raised his voice, pressing him aggressively. Gadolf's pupils shook even harder as thick sweat gathered on his forehead, rolling down his pale cheeks. "What do you expect me to do?" His face practically screamed. Just then, Cobalt lost his patience entirely and roared, "Hurry up." The thing is, the exact moment Gadolf seemed to make up his mind and took a deep, desperate breath to confess. Smack! My hand suddenly flew through the air and struck Gadolf hard on the back of his neck. The force sent him tumbling forward on the floor, stars visibly spinning around his dazed head. Grrr! Oh dear, my hand slipped. I grinned broadly, flicking my hand casually as if I had just swatted a fly. The entire room went dead silent. Everyone in the lobby, our retainers and the Calpion delegation alike, stared fixedly at me. Their gazes were filled with nothing but absolute suspicion and utter bewilderment. My eyes twitched slightly under their collective stare. Was I too late? Was my hand slower than my eyes this time? I scratched the back of my head awkwardly, trying to break the heavy silence, and spoke up. "Haha, why is everyone looking at me like that?" While everyone stayed completely silent, Viscount Cobalt pressed his fingers firmly against the bridge of his nose, exhaling a breath of pure exhaustion before asking, "Hardin, why was Gadolf watching your reaction?" "That's what I'd like to know, why indeed," I murmured, looking up at the ceiling. "And why did you strike his neck just now?" He looked like his neck was stiff, so you could call it a sort of massage? Do you really think that makes any sense? Cobalt's voice was dangerously low. Why not? There's nothing wrong with that. When Cobalt glared at me as if he would bore a physical hole right through my head, I quickly averted my gaze. Look at that face, I thought. How could any man handle family affairs with such terrifying, unpredictable descendants? Cobalt scowled even deeper, his voice dropping into a register of pure dread. Hardin, don't tell me were you the one who touched the vault? Which vault are you referring to? I asked, playing dumb. Don't dodge the question. Obviously, I mean the family vault. Well, how did that go again? Answer properly now. Was it you who took the money? I waved my hands exaggeratedly in front of me, feigning deep offense. Hey, I didn't steal anything. What do you take me for? Then explain yourself. Why did you hit Gadolf? Looking around the room, I realized there was no place left to retreat. Everyone was waiting for my answer. I let out a long, dramatic sigh through my nose, crossed my arms over my chest, and declared boldly with a straight face. Ahem. I didn't steal it. I borrowed it. What? When Viscount Cobalt asked again with a completely blank, uncomprehending look on his face, I quickly waved both hands to clarify. Just as I said, I borrowed it. Money I'll obviously repay someday. You understand the concept of a loan, right? What are you talking about? Everyone's mouths hung wide open in sheer shock. Crazy. Did the eldest young master really steal it? Good heavens, we are truly ruined. As confused, horrified murmurs rapidly spread all around the room, I maintained a perfectly nonchalant, relaxed demeanor as I spoke. Don't worry, I'll pay it back soon enough. It was at that exact moment. Brother, what absolute nonsense are you spouting? The third young master, Malian, shouted fiercely. His face was twisted like a snarling wolf, completely shattering his usual mask of quiet sneers and passive-aggressive ridicule. His teeth ground together, so loudly I could hear them, and thick veins bulged violently across his forehead. He had endured it when I wasted an absolute fortune at the Night Academy without achieving a single thing. Because I was the family's eldest young master. He had endured it even when I lost my mana through my own arrogant mistake and still chose to live life soaked in liquor. He had endured it when I laid hands on the domain's innocent people and the household servants just to vent my pathetic anger, committing all manner of idiocy. Because I was his brother, because I was the family's young master, because he believed that, no matter how wretched I was, I would someday become the future head of this house. He had endured, endured, and endured again. But now, that very same brother had dared to touch the emergency vault money meant to save the estate? That absolute lunatic. Malian's entire body trembled violently with rage, and a suffocating wave of heat rushed through him. He looked ready to physically explode and kill me right then and there. Meanwhile, over on the Calpion side, so that's how it was. Donful stared at me with a completely expressionless face, then lifted the corner of his lips in a crooked, arrogant smirk. This brief, pathetic family commotion was more than enough for him to fully grasp the situation. Harden, harden, harden. How amusing, truly amusing. Your bottomless depth of stupidity knows no bounds, just like back in the academy days, and even now. Thanks to you, this has gotten a whole lot simpler. When an idiot goes sticking a blade to his own neck like this, there's no reason not to push it in. Donfell leaned back in his chair with a slanted, disrespectful posture and spoke curtly, breaking through our family's shouting. So then, what has become of the money? Cobalt and Malian's expressions twisted into masks of deep humiliation. Viscount Cobalt shut his eyes tightly for a moment, then opened them with trembling lids, looking at Donfell as he spoke in a strained, cracking voice. I'm sorry the situation has come to this. He lowered his head deeply, a proud nobleman, bowing to his former subordinate, then lifted it again and continued with immense effort. Given how things stand, could you possibly show some leniency? Leniency, you say? Donfell drawled, raising an eyebrow. Just extend the repayment date a little longer. I will ensure it is repaid in full with interest. Donfell pretended to ponder the request with an incredibly arrogant expression, tapping his chin, then answered flatly. No. No, Viscount Cobalt gasped. That's right. Donfell turned his head aside, completely dismissing the lord of our house, and jerked his chin toward his subordinates. The Calpion retainer, standing at the very front, immediately produced a crisp sheet of parchment from his robes, held it out for everyone to see, and spoke in a firm, booming voice. It is clearly stipulated in the contract signed with the Vinter Merchant Guild. If the debt is not repaid by the exact deadline, the collateral must be surrendered that very day. These contract terms apply equally to the Daphne Viscounty, as the official guarantor. But Viscount Cobalt tried to reason, stepping forward desperately, but the retainer ruthlessly cut him off and continued reading. According to the contract, that collateral appears to be the Daphne domain itself. That is... In that exact moment, the air inside the Grand Hall turned as cold as ice. The meaning behind those legal words was brutally simple. If we couldn't hand over the money today, the entire Daphne domain, our lands, our people, our home, would legally pass into the hands of the Calpion Viscounty. It's over. Good heavens. We're evicted. As everyone in the Daphne household watched, their faces completely draining of color, Viscount Cobalt spoke with a desolate, broken expression. Donfell, this is an exceptionally special, unforeseen circumstance. So please, if you could just... No. We will proceed strictly according to the terms of the contract. You truly intend to take the domain itself? Must you really go this far? Utter despair clouded Viscount Cobalt's face. On the other hand, Donfell remained perfectly composed, leaning back as he answered in a flat, indifferent tone. Does it matter? What? Daphne was already a family in ruin, Donfell said, his words cutting like glass. Are you trying to say that handing over your lands now makes things any worse than they already are? As Cobalt clenched his jaw so tight his entire face trembled with rage, Donfell slowly turned his head toward my corner and spoke, a mocking glint in his eye. Am I wrong? Hardened Daphne. In an instant, everyone's eyes in the lobby turned on me all at once. Just what has he done? You absolute bastard. This is all because of that man. Their glares were filled with a toxic mixture of resentment and pure rage. If only this useless fool hadn't caused so much trouble and stolen the gold, it would never have come to this point. Well then, let's proceed quickly with the formal transfer procedures. As Donfell spoke leisurely, already acting like the master of the house, I slowly relaxed my blank expression. I let out a soft huff and shook my head. You lot, saying things like that, don't you feel the least bit ashamed? Are you talking to me? Donfell asked back, slightly bristling as his smirk faltered. I met his gaze directly, my voice calm, steady, and entirely devoid of fear. Yes, you. More precisely, I'd say scum like you don't have the right to talk. Scum? Are you referring to us, the Calpion family? Donfell's voice dropped, a dangerous edge creeping in. That's right, I replied smoothly. Stealing the land of the house you once faithfully served, shattering another person's mana circuit, ungrateful, treacherous ingrates like you. What else would anyone call that but trash? Donfell's brow tightened instantly, a dark fury flashing across his features, while the Daphne retainers' faces were completely overtaken by sheer, unadulterated shock. Brother, for heaven's sake, shut up, Malian screamed, stepping toward me. What absolute nonsense are you spouting? Cobalt cried out desperately, terrified of provoking the giants further. But I didn't back down. Donfell stared at me, his voice returning to a steady, undisturbed, yet incredibly lethal register. Hardened Daphne, is this your pathetic attempt to show some defiance? It's not defiance, I said, resting my hand lightly on my hip. I'm just stating the objective truth. A cornered rat baring its teeth before being crushed. Was that what he thought this was? Donfell exhaled sharply through his nose and spoke again, his eyes locked onto mine. So, what is it you're actually trying to say? I highly doubt you opened your mouth for no reason. Oh, sharp of you. That's right, I grinned, stepping out from the shadows into the center of the lobby. I'd like to offer you all a chance. A chance? Donfell sneered. Yes, a chance for you to prove you're not just complete, ungrateful trash. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I don't intend to show the slightest bit of mercy to your lot. Donfell began to reply, his voice dripping with condescension, but I ruthlessly cut him off, my voice ringing clear across the stone hall. Duel me, right here, right now. A duel? Donfell raised one thick eyebrow high, staring at me as if I had lost my mind entirely. Did you just say a duel? Yes, a duel. A duel? In that instant, an old memory flashed vividly across Donfell's arrogant face. Out of the way, trash. It was the memory of the exact moment he had destroyed my mana circuits back at the academy. Donfell slowly licked his lips with the broad, disgusting sweep of his tongue, a dark amusement settling into his eyes as he spoke. Are you speaking in your right mind? Why? Do I look insane to you? That bastard. Donfell's arrogant, leisurely expression vanished, without anyone noticing. In its place, a quiet, dangerous anger settled over his massive frame. I drew the sword from my hip with a sharp, fluid motion and let out a crooked, mocking grin. Sorry to disappoint you, but I'm not insane. I said it because I have my reasons. Reasons? That's right. If I win this duel, you'll write off every single copper of my family's debt. I closed my eyes tightly for a fraction of a second, centering the explosive force inside my belly. But if you win, and when I slowly opened them again, whoosh! A vivid, undeniable blue glow blazed brilliantly in my eyes. I'll give you something very valuable." In that single breathtaking instant, everyone in the room, Donful included, reacted with profound shock in their own ways. That's Hardin. That unmistakable blue radiance. It was the absolute proof of raw reinforcement, the most basic, undeniable skill of a true mana user. That bastard's circuits should have been completely destroyed. Donful's mind practically reeled. Even he, the very man who had personally crushed my mana circuits into worthless pieces, couldn't mask his shock. How is this possible? "Brother got his mana back?" Malian gasped. The family and the retainers, who had completely exhausted themselves over the years trying every expensive medicine and treatment just to restore a fraction of my mana, were left gaping like fish. Nearly everyone in the kingdom believed my recovery to be an absolute impossibility. So how was I standing here, channeling reinforcement as if I had never been broken? While all around me people opened and closed their mouths in mute, paralyzed astonishment, Donfell asked in a low, murderous voice, What did you do?" I calmly placed a hand over my lower abdomen, right where the artificial core vibrated with compressed power. Then, focusing every single shred of my will, I drew the surrounding mana into myself. Blue hole. The moment the surging, magnetic force of the wave swordsmanship's cultivation method fused with the violent maelstrom of my newly formed core, a sudden gust of wind swept through the lobby, and my hair fluttered wildly in the air. What is that? Just what in the world? None of the trained mana users in the room could hide their sheer amazement at this strange, unprecedented, and violently aggressive flow of energy. I smiled crookedly at Donfell and spoke. "I used this." Donfell's eyes narrowed into razor-thin slits. "Oh, so you brought yourself some fresh meat, is that it?" To repair shattered circuits required not only a massive fortune, but also an unyielding resolve and tireless, agonizing effort. Even then, the guarantee of success was practically zero. The hardened Daphne that Donfell remembered was a dullard, a rotted, pathetic wretch with not a single scrap of grit. If that man had somehow restored his power overnight, there could only be one logical answer. How did you get your hands on that secret technique?" The moment the words left Donfell's mouth, everyone's jaws dropped even lower. "Brother got hold of a secret technique? When? If not, none of this makes any sense." Everyone in the domain recalled me as a man who shut himself away in a dark room, wallowing in wretched self-pity. To be completely blunt, I hadn't been particularly impressive even before I lost my mana. So how had a failure like me acquired a legendary secret technique, let alone mastered it enough to reclaim my mana so effortlessly? While every single eye in the lobby remained riveted on me, I spoke up again, raising the stakes. "I don't intend to tell you where I got it. It's a quite special, priceless, secret technique. So I'd like to stake the manual of this technique on our duel. What do you say? Interested?" Of course, no such physical manual existed. The grand secret that had restored this broken body was locked safely inside my own memories. But I knew psychology. If that arrogant bastard has even a shred of greed or sense in his head, there's no way he won't take this bait. Donfell mulled it over briefly, his eyes darting to the blue fire in my gaze, and then he lifted the corner of his lips in a faint, ambitious smile. A secret technique capable of restoring mana even to such a worthless wretch would be an invaluable asset to his own rising family. It would be quite useful. For the mere price of crossing blades once more, with such familiar trash, the reward was more than plentiful. I smiled leisurely, seeing the hook sink in, and said, "In that case, let's consider the deal settled." "Hardin, are you truly saying you'll go through with this madness?" Viscount Cobalt suddenly cried out in absolute alarm, breaking his silence. "Yes," I replied, turning to him. "And on whose authority?" "Well, mine, I suppose. I did cause all this financial trouble by borrowing the gold, so it's only right that I clean up my own mess, too." "Don't talk absolute nonsense," Cobalt roared, his face flushing. "Even if you've somehow miraculously regained your mana, do you really think you stand a single chance against him?" The retainers standing beside him gave slight, grim nods of agreement. Everyone in the room knew it. Simply reclaiming a baseline level of mana didn't suddenly make the steel serpent, a foe who could be faced so lightly. Cobalt raised his voice further, desperation cracking through his noble facade. Have you already completely forgotten what that monster did to you? At that moment, painful fragments of the past came flooding back into my mind, triggered by his distress. My lord, it's terrible. The young master has been gravely injured. What did you say? It was the memory of that dark day when the original Hardin, whom Cobalt had cherished like a precious jewel, returned from the academy bloody and broken. And now, his son meant to walk right back into that exact same hell. What father could possibly allow such a thing? I shrugged my shoulders lightly and replied with chilling indifference. Yes, I've forgotten. What? My memory's been rather poor lately. I can't seem to recall the old days very well. Cobalt's face twisted in pure paternal anguish. No, absolutely not. Come to your senses, Hardin. As Cobalt frantically reached out his hands to grip my shoulders and physically stop me, a sharp voice cut between us. Father. Malion? Malion stepped firmly between Cobalt and me, his eyes cold and calculated behind his glasses as he spoke. Allow the duel. What are you saying, Malion? Step aside. This entire catastrophic matter began because of eldest brother, Malion continued, his tone as biting and sharp as ever. He adjusted his glasses calmly. Cobalt paused, staring at his third son in utter disbelief. What? Either way, if this goes on, the family is completely finished today. We lose the domain regardless, Malion said, his voice stripped bare of any emotion. Rather than ending with absolutely nothing, isn't it right to at least give eldest brother a chance to take full responsibility for the ruin he caused? But, Father, this is the time to think about the survival of the family, not your feelings. Cobalt Daphne's face quivered violently, the brutal logic piercing through his defenses, and he couldn't bring himself to speak another word. Watching our family squabble, Donfell crossed his massive arms and let out a curt, mocking chuckle. How utterly foolish, Viscount Cobalt. What did you just say? Cobalt whispered. To my eyes, it seems you are letting petty emotions rule your lordship. Dunfull then turned his heavy gaze back to me, staring straight into my eyes. To lose the final chance to save your entire house because of soft, sentimental feelings, surely that's the one thing a true lord must never do. In that instant, Donfull licked his lips again, his bloodlust leaking out. Isn't that so, Hardin? Yes, I nodded calmly, meeting his predatory gaze with a steady smile. You're exactly right. Hardin, Cobalt cried out, his face on the absolute verge of tears. I slowly wiped all traces of a smile from my face. Turning away from Donfull, I faced Viscount Cobalt squarely and spoke with a gravity that shook the older man to his core. Father, you are the Lord. My blue eyes, as calm and deep as a still sea, seemed to pierce right through something broken inside Viscount Cobalt. His proud shoulders began to tremble slightly under my gaze, and his head slowly lowered. Viscount Cobalt knew the harsh truth himself. This duel between Donfull and me was reckless beyond all reason, and the legal odds of my victory were nearly non-existent. I am the Lord. Even so, he knew with absolute certainty that if we didn't fight right here, our lineage would simply end in disgrace today. A lord had to choose to protect the house, however faint and impossible the chance might be. Before he was Hardin Daphne's father, he was the father of every single living soul in this domain. Viscount Cobalt lifted his trembling hand with immense difficulty and forced the words out. Do as you will, Hardin. His voice quivered with a strange, agonizing mixture of deep sorrow and terrifying worry. Donfell shrugged his massive shoulders, entirely satisfied. It seems our agreement has been reached nicely. He slowly turned his head back toward me, shooting me that characteristically flat, dispassionate gaze. Then, since the duel is now official, prepare yourself to face me, Hardin Daphne. Fine, let's go to the back courtyard. I nodded gravely, turned my back on the delegation, and stepped out the door ahead of everyone. And in that exact moment, hidden from their sight, got him. A wide, sinister grin stretched across my lips, the shadows of the doorway darkening my face. The Daphne mansion's rear courtyard was a barren, desolate clearing, with little more than a few scattered, weathered trees standing here and there. The onlookers of both houses, Calpion and Daphne alike, stood lined up in rigid rows along the perimeter. A duel, really. The eldest young master actually got his hands on a secret technique? Even so, isn't the chance of victory practically slim to none? The Daphne retainers' faces were pale, caught in a miserable limbo between desperate doubt and grim resignation. On the opposite side, the contrast couldn't be starker. Finally, I'll get to see great young Master Donfel's skill again. Just because that fool regained some baseline mana doesn't mean he can miraculously win. This will be highly entertaining. On the Calpion side, everyone wore arrogant looks brimming with confidence and ease. They were all completely certain of the outcome. To them, Donfel would win this fight in a matter of seconds. Even if I had somehow recovered my mana, there wasn't a single soul here who didn't know the gap between Donfel and the old Harden was as vast as that between a majestic dragon and a squirming worm. Just then, a Daphne retainer called out, his voice echoing nervously in the open air. The young masters are arriving. From opposite sides of the clearing, Donfel and I walked into the center, and every single gaze in the courtyard locked onto us. Thud, thud. Donfel was the first to step forward, his massive frame commanding the space. Gripping his heavy, colossal bastard sword with both hands, he drew a slow, deliberate cross in the air before him and spoke in a booming voice. Donfel Calpion, eldest of the Calpion Viscounty, under the name of God Farron, I enter this sacred duel and swear absolute obedience to its outcome. Step, step. From the opposite side, I walked forward, my hands firmly gripping a standard longsword. I mirrored his exact gesture, drawing the sacred cross in the air. Harden Daphne, eldest of the Daphne Viscounty. Under the name of God Farron, I enter this sacred duel and swear absolute obedience to its outcome. I lifted my gaze, while Donfel looked down at me from his towering position. There was a stark height difference of nearly a full head between us. Donfel's hulking, rugged, and muscle-bound frame stood in absolute contrast to my skinny, wasted, and pale body. He held a massive bastard sword, gleaming, pristine, and perfectly maintained, while I faced him with a shabby, unornamented longsword, whose edge hadn't even been properly sharpened for real combat. Everything about the matchup stood in a brutal, laughing contrast, and to anyone's eyes, the final outcome appeared preordained. A heavy, suffocating silence hung in the crisp air for a long moment. At last, the retainer, acting as the official officiant, turned his head toward Viscount Cobalt and asked, "Viscount Cobalt, do you grant your final approval for this duel?" Viscount Cobalt forced himself to still his trembling body. He let out a deep, heavy sigh, one after another, his face shifting through expressions of profound grief with every breath he drew. Standing tightly beside him, Malion quietly nudged him, his tone urgent yet freezing. "Father." "Yes." Cobalt shut his eyes tightly, burying his paternal instincts deep down, then opened them again. In a low, strained, and completely heartbroken voice, he forced the final declaration out. "I, Cobalt Daphne, Lord of the Daphne Viscounty, in place of the radiant god Farron, acknowledge this duel as rightful and hereby declare it active." At that exact instant, Donfel raised his massive bastard sword high over his head, settling into his battle stance. Oberhau, the high guard posture meant to cleave down in a single mighty overhead strike. Though it technically left his lower body open to counters, it was a symbol of his utter, mocking confidence that a single brutal blow would completely crush whatever resistance I offered. Donfel twisted his lips into a crooked, predatory smirk. "That secret technique you claim to have obtained, I'd like to see just how impressive it really is before I break you again." Whoosh! A fierce, blinding blue radiance ignited violently in his eyes as he flooded his muscles with mana. I can't breathe. The sudden release of pressure was immense. All the faces of the ordinary retainers gathered in the courtyard, twisted in strain, some stepping back. It was a suffocating pressure, like invisible needles stabbing into every inch of bare flesh. Cold sweat beaded across the foreheads of the Daphne guards, and every hair on their bodies stood on end. It felt as though there wasn't a mere human standing in front of them, but some colossal, prehistoric predator. He can't possibly stand against this pressure. Is the young master really expected to fight that monster? Despair completely filled the eyes of the Daphne household. But in that exact moment, I felt nothing but a thrilling rush. I looked at his grand posture and his raging mana, and a light chuckle escaped me. Yeah, look forward to it. I'll show you properly. I was going to strike him so thoroughly that his senses would be knocked clean out of his arrogant skull. I smiled lightly, my own artificial core beginning to spin, ready to unleash the ballista within. The dry morning air of the backyard hung thick with static. Donful and I stood facing each other without moving a single inch, both locked into our respective combat stances. A subtle, lethal glint of light glowed uniformly in our eyes. On the surface, we were perfectly still, but beneath that stillness lay a fierce war of positioning. Only our gazes clashed directly in the air, while the hands gripping our swords and the precise placement of our feet made such minute, calculated adjustments that they were almost entirely imperceptible to the untrained eye. Step, step. With every microstep, we took to subtly shift our balance and test each other's spacing. The atmosphere in the backyard grew even colder, as though the entire clearing were freezing over under the weight of our murderous intent. Around the perimeter, the spectators from both families held their breath, swallowing nervously in the tense, heavy silence. Donful exhaled heavily through his nose, his patience fraying under my unblinking stare as he asked sharply, "Why isn't he coming first?" I merely shrugged my shoulders in response, refusing to give him the satisfaction of an answer. Has he gotten scared or something? Donfel sneered internally. Well, if he was waiting for me to panic, there was absolutely no need for him to keep waiting. Ta! Donfel kicked off the dirt, shooting forward like a lightning bolt. His acceleration was so explosive that, for a split second, it felt as if his afterimage had stretched out continuously behind him in the air. W fast. Shattered gasps of awe burst out among the Daphne onlookers. Donfel was barely in his mid-20s, yet among all the trained mana users gathered here today, not a single one felt confident they could match that kind of raw, predatory speed. Shot! Donfel's towering shadow closed the distance in the blink of an eye, looming right in front of my face. I'll finish this quickly, he resolved. Buzz! Donfel brought his massive two-handed bastard sword down from above in a powerful bone-shattering overhead strike. Putting the absolute entirety of his weight and momentum into the blow from the Oberhaus stance, it was a crushing slash meant to split me in two. I have to dodge. That attack is suicidal. Everyone's eyes widened in profound shock. It was painfully clear to anyone watching that such an overwhelming strike couldn't possibly be blocked by my shabby, unsharpened longsword without it snapping in half. But I did not dodge. Silently, calmly, I swung my sword upward from below, guiding my blade along a perfectly calculated trajectory. He's meeting it head-on? In the exact moment, Donfel's brow furrowed in utter disbelief at my apparent suicide attempt. Kong! The two pieces of iron collided with a deafening ring, sending up a brilliant spray of friction sparks between our faces. The immense kinetic force of his descent rippled through my frame, pushing me back a couple of steps to absorb the impact, while the precise angle of my deflection forced Donfel's upper body to lift slightly, throwing him off balance. A dark, dangerous thrill sparked in his eyes. This might be more interesting than I thought. Donfel let out a mocking chuckle and immediately regained his footing. He fluidly changed his sword's trajectory mid-air and thrust forward again with terrifying fluidity. Shit! In that split second, Donfel's sword began to wildly twist and warp like a living snake. What is that? The sword is bending. It was the snake dance, a perfected, highly lethal sword technique based on Calpion's premier secret style, which their family had poured vast sums of stolen money into developing over the decades. The blade, writhing and rippling like a venomous serpent, was designed to pierce the opponent along an entirely unpredictable path and variable speed. It was the exact technique that had earned him the fearsome title of Steel Serpent. The shifting tip of his sword danced through the air, aiming directly for my lower abdomen, the exact vulnerable place where the original Harden's mana circuits had been shattered once before. "Bite him apart!" Donful roared in his heart. Kong! At that precise millisecond, a tremendous, ear-splitting crash rang out through the clearing. "My, look at that, some little snake showing up." I sneered as my sword, once again, sparked violently against his, perfectly catching and deflecting the erratic trajectory of Donfel's blade away from my stomach. Donfel's heart did a sudden, uncomfortable flip. He blocked it again? That baseline trash? For a brief moment, a dense, dark strength gathered in Donfel's eyes as he forced his mana to surge. Was that just blind luck? Refusing to believe it, Donfel spun his massive body with terrifying momentum and lashed out with his sword once more, executing another fluid transition. Shack! Once again, the steel danced like a rabid serpent, slipping seamlessly into what should have been my blind spots and vulnerabilities. But my gaze merely twitched slightly, reading the subtle shifts in his shoulders and wrists. Kong! Sparks flew aggressively again as I cleanly knocked the weapon aside, with a precise, rigid parry. Donfel narrowed his brows, his expression hardening into absolute disbelief. He blocked it again? Ta! Sensing the shift in momentum, the two of us simultaneously leapt apart, widening the distance between us to reevaluate. "That secret technique of yours, it's not ordinary, it seems," Donfel muttered, his voice dropping into a low growl. "Acting like that was some great attack," I countered, casually shrugging my shoulders. Donfel ground his teeth together so hard the sound echoed. He didn't challenge me to this duel without thinking, "Is that it?" He raised his heavy bastard sword once more, his muscles tensing as he spoke. "Interesting. The mere fact that you actually believed you could stand against me for more than a second." Ta! Donfel kicked off the ground, tearing up the dirt as he charged back in with reckless fury. Kong! 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 The serpent blade moved even faster now, striking through the air in a relentless flurry of blinding sparks. The attacks poured down on me endlessly, their sheer kinetic momentum growing fiercer and wilder with every passing second. But still, my defense was not breaking, not even a fraction. "Really? If you're having so much fun, keep going," I taunted, even letting a leisurely, mocking smile slip onto my face as I effortlessly deflected each consecutive strike. The more my face lit up with amusement, the deeper the furrow between Donfel's dark brows became. "What is this?" Kong! Kong! The more our swords clashed, the clearer the terrifying reality became to him. My defense wasn't simply a string of desperate lucky blocks. Perfect angles, perfect deflections, minimal movement for maximum efficiency. To Donfel, it felt as if I could see right through his every hidden thought and muscle twitch, reacting precisely before his blade even occupied the space. The man standing in front of him was undeniably the scrawny, wasted Harden, yet somehow hitting my blade felt like striking against an unshakable, towering stone wall. Is that really the same guy I knew? It didn't make any logical sense. No matter how amazing the secret sword technique he had supposedly obtained was, he was still a human who had to practice and master it over time. But for Harden to have reached this level of mastery in such a short, impossible span of time? Each time his sword was effortlessly deflected away, Donfel felt not only a surge of profound confusion, but also a growing, icy tremor in the bedrock of his heart. My speed, my physical strength, my raw mana, I am superior in absolutely everything, but I can't break through. He simply couldn't comprehend it. There should have been no mathematical possibility of Harden meeting his sword for this long, let alone perfectly countering his family's signature style. Time and again, the scene unfolding right before his eyes was entirely different from the quick, bloody execution he had expected. How many intense sword exchanges had there been by now? 30? 50? Kong! My long sword rose sharply from below, catching the underside of Donfel's heavy blade and deflecting it upward with a harsh screech of iron. Hey-yup! In that split second, Donful's massive body wavered. Only slightly, a subtle loss of balance, so minute it was almost invisible to anyone else. But to me, it was a gaping canyon. Slash! My blade immediately drew a graceful, lightning-fast arc through the air and flew directly inward. Donfel's instincts screamed. He quickly hardened his expression and jerked his head violently to the side. Shock! The sharp tip of my long sword grazed Donfel's cheek, slicing through the flesh and scattering a spray of bright crimson blood into the morning air. That was close. Donfel's mind reeled as cold sweat mixed with the blood. If he had let his guard down for even a fraction of a second, that strike would have been a fatal throat-slitting wound. How was that? I asked smoothly. Grrr! I gave him a thin, sinister smile, and Donfel's pupils quivered violently in response. Ta! Donfel leapt far back, putting a massive distance between us, as he hastily wiped the trailing blood from his cut cheek. A sudden, momentary lull settled over the battlefield, and in that silence, all the onlookers' eyes grew as wide as saucers. Did the eldest young master just land a blow? Hardin is actually fighting Donfel evenly? Young master. Everyone on the Daphne side had fully braced themselves for a one-sided, tragic execution. But I wasn't merely holding my own. I had just succeeded in drawing first blood against the steel serpent. Yet, the person who was the most profoundly shocked by this outcome was none other than Donfel himself. What is this? His eyes wavered bit by bit as he stared at the blood on his glove. At this point, a terrifying question began to crack through his mind. Had this entire duel really been just reckless bravado, an idiot's desperate arrogance? Does he actually intend to win? Crack. A faint, insidious unease began to splinter the bedrock of his absolute confidence. That can't possibly be true. Crack! Donfel ground his teeth so hard a sickening creak echoed from his jaw, and he forced his fading momentum back up through sheer rage. Gah! Tatadak, tatak. The snake's head danced even faster, driven by desperation. The blade moved so swiftly that afterimages lingered continuously in the air, making it look as if multiple phantom heads were floating around my body, snapping from all directions. Yet even as the wild attacks poured down, I fluidly dodged and blocked them with minimal exertion, speaking to him in an unhurried, almost conversational tone. It's getting faster and faster, isn't it? Don't you dare act arrogant with me, Donfel roared. A worthless, broken failure like you could never hope to stand against me. Faster, stronger, the snake accelerated further, pushed to its absolute limits. Kong! Kong! The sparks erupting in the air grew even fiercer, wilder, and brighter. There was no better word than relentless to describe his assault. Step by step, under the sheer physical weight of his heavy bastard sword, I began to be pushed back, slowly retreating across the dirt. My hands started to visibly quiver, and my unconditioned legs trembled under the strain. It was then. Thunk! Ah! While retreating, my foot caught sharply on a stray stone, and my body lurched backward unsteadily, leaving my front completely exposed. My face showed a flash of clear alarm, and a cruel, bloodthirsty smile instantly crept over Donfel's lips. It's over! Shh! 5 phantom snakes lunged at my exposed abdomen in unison, aiming to pierce completely through my flesh and destroy what was left of me. In that entirely unbalanced posture, there was absolutely no way a one-star novice could withstand such a savage coordinated assault. But right then, slide. The alarm vanished from my face, and a brilliant smile spread across my lips instead. It was a sly, sinister grin, the corners of my mouth curling up almost to the point of tearing, half my face hidden in the dark shadow of his looming form. He's smiling now. Donfel's expression twisted in sudden, gut-wrenching confusion. Ta! Using the stone that had caught my heel as a pivot point, I kicked off the ground with one foot, regaining my perfect balance in a flash. I shifted that entire backward momentum straight into the sword I deliberately held, drawn back, spinning my body into a devastating, sweeping strike. An unyielding, horizontal slash flew straight toward the four approaching snake heads. Kong! A brilliant explosion of sparks burst into the air, and the four serpent necks were all sliced clean through as my iron shattered his momentum. Donfal's eyes practically bulged out of his head in sheer shock as his ultimate offensive collapsed into nothing. "You shouldn't let your guard down," a voice echoed from directly overhead. He lifted his head in a daze and saw me falling straight down toward him from the air, having used the momentum of the spin to leap. When did he get up there? In the exact instant, Donfal's face went entirely slack with bewilderment. Smosh! Gah! My foot smashed into Donfal's face without a shred of mercy. The sheer impact felt like he'd been rammed head-on by a charging bull. Donfal's broken teeth flew into the air as a mixture of blood, and spit sprayed out into the dirt. Warring! His massive 2-meter frame was hurled far back by the force of the kick, slamming into the stone boundary wall with a heavy, deafening crash. What? What is this? Everyone watching stared blankly, their mouths hanging wide open in absolute disbelief. Swaying unsteadily from the impact, his face now a battered, bleeding mess, Donfal used his heavy bastard sword like a makeshift cane to barely prop his towering frame upright. Messed up my control a bit. I grinned broadly, casually rolling my ankle around to loosen it up. The ballista-like output of this artificial core was still a bit tricky to regulate, but the raw power was undeniably magnificent. The eldest young master's attack it landed cleanly? What was that movement just now? It felt like he literally disappeared for a second. Whispers of pure shock rippled through the onlookers. Could this reality actually be happening? Even seeing it play out right in front of their own eyes, not a single soul could bring themselves to believe it. It was Hardin. That very same Hardin Daphne, the useless fool whose mana circuits had been shattered with a single casual punch from Donfal back at the academy. Yet here he was, not only driving the great steel serpent back, but even sending his 2-meter frame flying through the air with a single kick. Gahak, what the hell did you just? Swaying on his feet, Donfal struggled to steady his trembling posture and forced his hands to grip his sword again. I merely shrugged my shoulders at his indignation. What do you mean? What? I beat you up, and you got hit. Pretty straightforward, isn't it? You absolute coward, using cheap tricks. Gah! He spat, wiping blood from his chin. Cheap tricks? I wouldn't even call what I just did a technique. It was just a basic kick. Shut up! Ta! Donfal charged forward again, his heavy footsteps tearing up the dirt. Just now, I merely let my guard down, he desperately rationalized to himself. He had been so absolutely sure of his victory that he had relaxed, only to be caught off guard by a lucky counterattack. It was just a fluke. A one-time slip-on that he would never ever allow to happen again. I am stronger. My speed, the systematic refinement of my sword, the raw quantity of my mana, everything was vastly superior. If I just fought properly, earnestly, without letting my emotions get the better of me, there was absolutely no way I could lose to trash like him. That had to be true. Hadn't my pristine academy records and the fearsome title of Steel Serpent proved it all along? Shat! Resolving himself once more, he thrust out his snake-like blade in a furious arc. But once more, I calmly deflected Donfal's sword to the side, parrying it effortlessly as if I had already seen its trajectory coming a mile away. What are you doing looking over there? Smosh! Before he could even register the parry, my foot slammed heavily into Donfal's exposed side. Ooeeg, bleeg. Donfal staggered backward several steps, doubling over completely as he violently retched from the agonizing impact to his ribs. I slowly walked forward, closing the distance between us with calm, measured steps. I looked down at his trembling form and spoke, my voice dripping with cold promise. Clench your teeth. Because from here on out, it's going to hurt like hell. My expression showed no hesitation whatsoever, only utter, unshakable conviction. Those blue eyes of mine exuded a savage, overwhelming energy, like an alpha predator locking onto its prey. Donful trembled violently, the terrifying pressure finally breaking his composure as he erupted into a hoarse, desperate scream. "Shut up!" That I would lose? To a piece of worthless scum like him? Anxious, suffocating dread spread rapidly across Donful's battered face. Crack. He clenched his remaining teeth, his bloodshot eyes burning more fiercely, with a mixture of rage and terror. Gah. Squeezing out the absolute last reserves of his strength, he charged at me again. Kang! My sword sliced off the snake's head yet again, effortlessly shattering his form. Smosh! Ah! This time, my knee smashed straight into Donful's face, completely crushing his front teeth into splinters. Donful's massive body tumbled across the hard ground with a loud, pathetic thud. Hi! Bleeding profusely from his shattered nose and spitting out chunks of his broken teeth, Donful shrank back, wobbling on his hands and knees in pure, unadulterated fear. The terrifying realization that he was completely outmatched had finally broken his spirit. "This is just the beginning," I muttered with a cold smile, advancing on him like an inescapable shadow, swinging my sword and throwing fists, one after another in a relentless rhythm. Left, right, up, down. Thud, thump, crunch. Every single time, I calmly announced exactly where I would strike. The blows landed precisely on that spot with devastating weight. Gah, here. And with each precise impact, more brutal wounds and deep purple bruises spread across Donful's rapidly failing body. Why can't I avoid this? His mind screamed in agonizing desperation. This was Hardin, that worthless broken scum from the academy. He wasn't remarkably fast, and his physical strength shouldn't be this overwhelming. Yet it was as if he could see Donful's every hidden intent, striking from complete blind spots at the perfect, most excruciating timing. By now, it felt less like a duel and more like he was fighting a terrifying ghost. What kind of monstrous swordsmanship was this supposed to be? No. Was this even a gap that could be explained by swordsmanship alone? A deep, suffocating doubt grew exponentially, entirely shaking the foundations of his heart. "Right," I said quietly, executing a sharp feint with my sword toward his right side. Donfel flinched violently, his entire body spasming in panic as he scrambled to throw up a desperate guard on the right. Hesitation, total misdirection. I instantly stopped the sword mid-motion, looking at his completely exposed flank, and spoke again. "No, left." Before he could even process the correction, I violently drove my foot straight into Donful's ribs. Smack! Goo-ha! Staggering away like a drunkard, Donful's face twisted in absolute confusion, his head snapping around in a daze as he struggled to keep his footing. Left? Right? No, where the hell was the attack actually coming from? I'm losing. It was a systematic, brutal string of one-sided violence, like a cruel cat mercilessly toying with a trapped mouse. Donful's raw survival instincts screamed at him to stop. If he kept fighting like this, all that awaited him was an eternity of agonizing pain. He had to finish it quickly, with one final, desperate gamble. Not yet. Fwoosh! Driven by sheer, mad panic, Donful drew up every single ounce of his remaining mana, his bloodshot eyes burning bright with a manic light. Ah! Sha, sha, sha. From low to high, he thrust his heavy bastard sword forward, the steel completely wreathed in a thick, blazing blue glow. Weapon enchant, the definitive proof of a second-star knight. I stood completely motionless where I was, not even bothering to shift into a defensive stance. I didn't move an inch, staring at his approach as if I didn't find it worth the effort to engage. Seeing my stillness, Donful's panicked gaze suddenly turned cold and sharp with predatory glee. "You arrogant fool." Shat! At that exact millisecond, the lunging, enchanted serpent split into 9 separate, roaring heads all at once, crashing toward my chest in a single, unified breath. Hydra. It was a high-level technique that accelerated the sword to its absolute physical limit, creating a cluster of lethal afterimages striking from 9 different directions simultaneously. It was Donfel's ultimate, proudest technique, one that had taken him years of grueling training to perfect. You'll regret your arrogance. This attack possessed absolutely no blind spots. There was no escaping it. But right then, I merely exhaled a light breath through my nose and took a casual step straight forward, right into the jaws of his ultimate move. My steps were completely relaxed, as if I were simply out for a morning stroll. Madman? Donfel thought, a triumphant smile beginning to twist his lips. Was he trying to kill himself? Just as the 9 blades were about to shred my flesh, my expression hardened, and I murmured in a low, grave, and echoing voice. Ungrateful bastard. Crack. My face twisted into a mask of pure, ancient authority, and a suffocating, murderous energy suddenly surged wildly around my body. What is that? Donfel's triumphant smile died instantly. For a split second, it looked as if some terrifying, primeval demon was rising directly behind my back, and an icy confusion flickered across his face. Calmly, but with flawless, microscopic precision, I thrust my long sword forward. That single sword instantly split into a cascade sequence of countless, overlapping arcs, turning the steel into a roaring, unstoppable wave. Kagak. Kaing. One by one, the 9 phantom serpents were ruthlessly devoured by the sweeping, majestic wave of my blade. All 9 snake heads were shot down in a flash, and then 4 or 5 lingering wave blades remained, still surging forward with undiminished explosive momentum. Cast! They pierced cleanly through Donfel's shoulder, flank, and thigh, painting the dirt with fresh blood. Guh, hew, guh. Staggering blindly under the force of the strike, Donfel took a few halting steps backward, his eyes entirely blank before collapsing heavily to his knees on the spot. I walked up to his kneeling form, with slow, leisurely steps, and tapped the flat of my blood-stained sword lightly against his trembling shoulder. If you want some more, I'm perfectly happy to oblige. But... Thud. Donfel could no longer formulate an answer. His eyes rolled back into his head, and his massive body simply went limp, crashing face-first into the dirt. I let out a deep, exhausted sigh and lowered my longsword, resting the tip against the ground. Then the silence of the backyard was broken by a wave of collective, terrified gasps. H. Hardin actually won. How in the world? Every single person standing in the backyard stared at me, their eyes stretched wide as saucers, their mouths opening and closing repeatedly without a single word coming out. I had won. Hardin Daphne had won. Against the mighty undefeated great young master Donfel. Were they caught in some shared impossible dream? Or, just as everyone was struggling to express their absolute bewilderment in different ways, the Calpion lines finally broke. Great young master. Are you all right? Calpion's panicked retainers ran straight past the midpoint, swarming around Donfel's unconscious form, desperately checking his pulse and propping his bloody head up. But all the mighty steel serpent could do was emit a pathetic, unconscious groan, unable to move a single finger. I looked down at the pathetic sight, channeled my voice so it rang across the entire clearing, and made a firm declaration. Tell your lord, when you get back, the debt is paid in full. Don't you dare show your faces around our estate ever again? That the head retainer stammered, glaring at me. If you understand my terms, take your precious great young master and get the hell out of my sight. The Calpion men glared up at me with eyes absolutely burning with resentment and humiliation, but seeing the cold blue light still lingering in my gaze, they quickly jerked their heads away and began shouting frantically. The carriage! Bring the carriage to the courtyard at once. We're leaving immediately with the great young master. Yes, sir. Carrying the battered, 2-meter frame of Donfel on their backs, the entire delegation quickly and shamefacedly hurried out of the backyard. When the loud commotion finally died down and the front gates slammed shut, I tossed my chipped longsword carelessly into the dirt and let out a long, ragged breath. Whew, tired as hell. What a drag. Just because I had to fight some arrogant, overrated big shot, did I really have to end up completely drenched in sweat like this? This body's endurance was still a total joke. Still, I pulled it off. I cracked a wide, deeply satisfied grin, feeling the artificial core hum quietly in my belly. Turning around, I locked eyes with the frozen, statue-like Daphne retainers and my dumbfounded family. "The debt's all settled," I said, wiping a smear of dust from my face. "So no more nagging about the vault, right?" No one could even form a proper sentence. Not a single person's expression could shake off the look of utter, cosmic bewilderment as they stared at me. What particular emotional undercurrent or unspoken dynamic between the main character and his father should be highlighted most when we begin writing the first part? The heavy wooden gates of the Daphne estate slammed shut, swallowing the retreating carriage and the panicked Calpian delegation with it. In the barren clearing of the backyard, a profound, ringing silence remained. Everyone of the Daphne household stood completely blankly, their mouths slightly ajar, blinking as they stared fixedly at me. Their minds were clearly short-circuiting. Hardin had won. He had actually won the duel. Against great young Master Donfell, of all people, the same Hardin they had universally dismissed as the useless, shut-in young master. That very Hardin had just brutally and systematically defeated Donfell, the feared steel serpent. And he had done so in a high-stakes, blood-soaked duel that had the absolute fate of the entire family riding on its outcome. It was a fundamentally unbelievable outcome, a complete subversion of reality, but everyone here had just seen it happen with their own two eyes. No one could quite bring themselves to speak. The silence stretched on. For so long it started to get uncomfortable. I let out a soft huff, scratched my chin lazily, and said in a completely indifferent tone, "Do you all have nothing more to say?" That was when the spell broke. Ta-da-dot. Viscount Cobalt and Commander Muljeebsen suddenly broke from the line, jumping forward and sprinting toward me, shouting at the top of their lungs. "Hardin, are you hurt anywhere?" "Young master." Before I could even take a step back, the two older men were all over me. The Lord frantically checked my body here and there, his trembling hands patting down my arms and chest, while Commander Muljeebsen, standing right beside him, stomped his feet anxiously into the dirt. "Ah, geez, I'm fine, so stop touching me," I complained, trying to swat their hands away. "No, I have to check properly," Cobalt insisted, his voice cracking with a frantic, desperate paternal instinct I hadn't seen from him before. "Did you suffer any sword wounds? Are you in pain anywhere?" I said I'm not. Seriously, what was all this ridiculous fuss about? I had barely broken a sweat during the actual exchange. Yet, ignoring my protests, Viscount Cobalt grabbed my chin with his calloused hand and forcefully turned, my head this way and that, inspecting the smudge of dirt on my cheek as if it were a mortal wound. In the meantime, the paralysis gripping the rest of the spectators finally shattered. "Is this not a dream?" a servant muttered, rubbing his eyes. "Did the young master really win? For real? You saw it earlier. Then the F family debt is gone?" Godolph, the household servants, even the stoic retainers, they all babbled with bewildered, ecstatic expressions, completely losing their decorum as if they didn't know what to say. "Are you really okay?" Cobalt asked again, staring deeply into my eyes. "Ah, I told you I am," I sighed, gently but firmly pulling my chin out of his grip. After a while, when the Lord finally finished thoroughly checking my body and confirmed I was completely unharmed, he let his shoulders drop and let out a long, trembling sigh. "Ha." He stared at me, his eyes swirling with a chaotic storm of emotions. Hardin, his ruined son, had actually beaten that monster, Donfell? Who could have possibly predicted such a miraculous result? It had been astonishing enough to learn that I'd somehow recovered my shattered mana, but to have gone entirely beyond that to achieve a flawless victory? I had single-handedly prevented the family domain from falling into others' hands, and definitively proved that I was superior to Donfell, the Steel Serpent. How could this be possible to him? It was simply incomprehensible. "Hardin, just how did you do it?" Cobalt finally asked, his voice a hushed whisper. "What do you mean?" "All of it. How did you get your mana back? Your swordsmanship? How did you beat Donfell?" I shrugged lazily. "I told you already, I acquired a secret manual." This isn't something you can do just by acquiring a secret manual. This is, Cobalt stammered, gesturing wildly at the cratered dirt where Donfell had been smashed. I looked at him, offering a simple, casual excuse to end the interrogation. Well, I wasn't just idling away in my room all that time. Harden. The exact moment he heard those words, Viscount Cobalt's breath hitched. I watched his eyes turn glassy, the tip of his nose stinging and turning a faint red. I could see the tragic narrative writing itself in his head. For years, he had thought his son did absolutely nothing but wallow in self-pity. He, like everyone else, had viewed me as a wastrel young master who stayed locked in his room without any motivation, only picking pathetic fights with others to vent his frustration. Cobalt himself believed that harsh assessment wasn't wrong. But for me to have produced this overwhelming outcome, had I not given up, then? To him it meant I had struggled and bled in dark, lonely places where no one could see. Just what kind of grueling, agonizing effort had his son gone through in total isolation to achieve this result? It was something Cobalt couldn't even dare to imagine. And the weight of his assumptions was crushing him. His eyebrows trembled entirely on their own, and a bitter, suffocating guilt welled up visibly inside him. Before Cobalt could drown entirely in his dramatic pool of parental guilt, the crowd erupted. Splendid work, young master. Congratulations, you have saved the family. Right afterward, the retainers and Commander Muljibzin broke out into fervent cheers, the sound echoing off the stone walls of the courtyard. There was no exaggeration here, no empty flattery. The fact that I had just saved the Daphne name from complete eviction was the literal, unvarnished truth. Commander Muljibzin quickly rushed to my side, his eyes wide and burning with a veteran's pure curiosity. He leaned in close, speaking to me in an incredibly serious, urgent tone. Just what kind of secret manual did you acquire, young master? What sort of extraordinary sword technique could bring about such staggering results? I waved my hand dismissively, cutting him off before his imagination ran completely wild. There was no such thing. Muljibzin blinked, his jaw dropping slightly. Pardon? I'm telling you, there was no such thing. I just said all that manual stuff to lure Donfell in and bait him into accepting the terms. Then, how exactly did you regain your mana? And what on earth was that swordsmanship we just witnessed? I grinned, tossing him a casual line. I just trained hard when no one was looking. That's all there is to it. Truly, that's all? Yes. Where would I even have gotten a legendary secret manual from in my room? Isn't that right? Well, to be mathematically precise, it was true that a secret manual existed. It just happened to be locked entirely inside my own brain. If I mention the wave swordsmanship now, I'm bound to get nothing but trouble. For people who hadn't yet developed the proper foundational qualities, trying to learn the true wave swordsmanship would be no better than hanging a pearl necklace on a pig's neck. It was infinitely better to leave them believing it didn't exist for the time being. But is it really possible to completely regain shattered mana through simple training alone? Muljibzin murmured, completely baffled by the concept. Who knows? I replied with a loose shrug. Maybe God Farron decided to look down and help me out. Oh, and I did buy and drink a whole bunch of expensive mana potions with the money from the storage, so maybe that played a minor part. Well, that part wasn't entirely a lie, at least. The moment I shrugged my shoulders, Muljibzin's expression shifted from confusion to deep, profound reverence. He looked at me with an intensity that made me want to step back, his voice dropping into a solemn, trembling register. Perhaps. God Farron answered your earnest efforts and absolute determination. Before my eyes, the veteran commander's eyes quickly turned red. His breath hitched, and he actually went so far as to sniffle loudly, wiping at his face. An awkward, deeply uncomfortable expression naturally took over my face. He's crying? Over this? The way he was sobbing, anyone would think I'd just fought and defeated a legendary sword saint instead of an overgrown, arrogant vassal. While I was standing there scratching the bridge of my nose in sheer embarrassment, trying to look anywhere else, the rest of the retainers pressed in. Thank you for your hard work. Truly, you've given us a chance to breathe. Thanks to you. The retainers once again bowed their heads deeply toward me, unable to contain their fervent cheers and fiercely admiring gazes. Amid all this chaotic adulation, "Young Master Hardin, long live!" At the shrill, desperate shout, cutting through the deeper voices from behind, everyone turned their eyes. And there stood Gadolf. Tears were literally streaming down his dirt-streaked face like twin rivers as he raised both hands high in the air, jumping up and down. I survived, his face practically screamed. Having been brought to the literal brink of an execution, or a lifetime of torture, and then surviving entirely because I knocked on fell out. Even if it had been me who nearly got him killed in the first place by stealing the gold, it was only natural for the idiot to react this way. Soon enough, his fanatical cry spread like wildfire through the guards. "Hell long live! Well done, young master." In no time at all, the backyard filled with a chorus of voices chanting my name over and over again. It felt exactly like being a triumphant general returning from a bloody world-shaping war. Just because I knocked down some Calpion riffraff, just because I did this much, you think showering me with praise like this is going to get to me, huh? You think I'd actually enjoy this cheap applause? Me? Though as I thought this, trying to maintain my dignified, aloof composure, the corners of my mouth were somehow completely betraying me, squirming around like a happy little worm. While I was thoroughly surrounded by the household and basking in this highly questionable victory celebration, a sudden chill cut through the warmth. I looked past the crowd and saw my brother, the third young master Malian, was standing a few paces back, staring fixedly directly at me. Unlike the ecstatic faces of the servants, there was something deeply odd and complex mixed into his expression, a heavy hint of bitter awkwardness, deep resentment, and overwhelming confusion. What's with him? It was a strange, suffocating atmosphere that faintly bothered my instincts, but I quickly pulled my gaze away from Malian, letting out a deep, resolute breath through my nose. Well, his attitude isn't important right now. For now, I've got something much more pressing to collect. There was still a massive, glittering chunk of business I had to deal with immediately. Step. I walked straight up to Viscount Cobalt, cutting a path through the cheering retainers, and spoke bluntly. "Father." Cobalt blinked, pulling himself out of his lingering daze. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes, of course. Say whatever you like, Hardin," he replied, his expression a mix of bewilderment and newfound respect. I crossed my arms over my chest, narrowing my eyes. "Those Vinter Merchant Guild bastards. What exactly are you going to do about them?" "The Vinter Merchant Guild?" "Yeah, our debt. Weren't they the scum who originally owed all that money to Calpion in the first place?" A slight, frustrated frown instantly formed between Cobalt's brows. He rubbed his chin, pondering the matter for a long, quiet moment before letting out a defeated sigh. "We've already searched for them as thoroughly as we could using our network. The Guildmaster took everything and vanished into thin air. Even if we spend the resources to chase them now, it's entirely no use. There's simply nothing more to be done. We have to consider it a dead loss. So to be absolutely clear, the family has zero intention of going after them anymore?" "Yes," Cobalt sighed, but then he paused, casting a highly suspicious, worried look my way. "But why exactly are you asking about this all of a sudden?" Seeing the sharp look in his eyes, I quickly shook my head, my face smoothing out into an expression of casual indifference. "No reason. Just curious about the details of our finances." "I see," Cobalt murmured, though he didn't look entirely convinced. Just as the wildly excited atmosphere in the courtyard finally began to settle down into a calm hum, I looked around furtively, raised my arms, and let out a massive, dramatic stretch. I'm tired. Tired. Yeah, I suddenly had to exert myself back there against that giant, and now my whole body's incredibly sore. "Were you secretly hurt during the duel after all?" Cobalt looked at me with immediate soaring alarm, his parental panic flaring right back up. "I'll summon the head physician to your quarters immediately." Before he could orchestrate another medical circus, I hurriedly waved both hands to shut it down. No, absolutely not. Forget the physician. I'll be completely fine if I just go to my room and get some uninterrupted rest. Are you truly all right? I told you, I'm perfectly fine. With that final dismissal, I turned my back on the lords and knights and began walking away toward the main building. Behind me, a chorus of warm, reverent voices followed my retreating back. If you need anything at all, young master, just say the word and rest well. Thank you for everything you did today, young master. Yeah, I muttered lazily, waving my hand over my shoulder without turning around as I slipped out through the adoring crowd. The moment I rounded the corner into the side hallway, a familiar, eager shadow fell over me. Oh ho, thank you for your incredible hard work, young master. I knew you could do it. I never doubted you for a second. Godolph, who had been watching my exit from a safe distance, approached me with an utterly ecstatic, brown-nosing face and practically shouted his praise. The exact millisecond he got within arm's reach, I lunged forward, grabbed him roughly by the scruff of his filthy neck, and spoke in a low, menacing whisper. Enough of that garbage. Shut your mouth. I've got something incredibly important to say, so follow me to my room right this second. Something to say? Godolph squeaked, his eyes going round as he choked slightly under my grip. What is it? Just shut up and come when I tell you to. Yes, young master. Why is he suddenly acting like this? Did I do something wrong again? Though his face was utterly perplexed and trembling with a familiar dread, Godolph quickly scrambled to follow along behind my fast-paced strides. A short while later, inside the privacy of my room. Creak! Thud! I shut the heavy door behind us, slid the lock into place, and turned around to face Godolph. Without beating around the bush, I commanded firmly, "Hey, pack up your things right now." Godolph's jaw practically dropped to the floor, his eyes widening. Pack up? Right now? Yeah. Grab whatever essentials we need. We're heading out of the estate immediately. Young master, after all that absolute chaos we just barely survived, where on earth are you planning to go again? I let out a broad, highly sinister grin, the blue core in my gut pulsing with a dark excitement as I answered. To catch those Vinter Merchant Guild bastards. Godolph tilted his head so far to the side, I thought it might snap off. Huh? Why the hell would we catch them? You already successfully paid off every single copper of the family's debt through the duel. That is exactly why we are going after them, I explained, my smile widening. Pardon? The sheer, staggering confusion on his face was a work of art. He clearly couldn't follow my logic in the slightest. Look, you idiot, I said, leaning in. Just now, you said it yourself. I effectively paid off 300,000 gold by winning that duel and forcing Calpion to tear up the contract, right? Yes, that's historically correct. Then that mathematically means I just personally repaid the massive debt those Vinter Merchant Guild scum owed to Calpion in their place. Well, in a convoluted way, I suppose, yes. Then don't those running bastards now legally and personally owe me 300,000 gold? Godolph blinked, a slow, terrifying realization dawning in his eyes. Is that actually how your mind works? Of course it does. I fixed him with a resolute expression, my voice vibrating with absolute firm conviction. These soft-headed noble types in this era truly didn't understand the fundamental value of money. It wasn't just a handful of loose copper coins we were talking about. It was 300,000 gold pieces. If there were criminals out there who thought they could just run off with that kind of wealth and leave my family holding the bag, the first instinct of any sane man should be to hunt them down to the ends of the earth, not to just passively give up and cry about it. Well, this is a spectacular opportunity for me. The old man, Viscount Cobalt, had explicitly stated to the entire courtyard that the family had absolutely zero intention of pursuing the Vinter Merchant Guild. They had abandoned the claim. In other words, if I hunted them down and extracted the funds myself, that 300,000 gold belongs entirely to me. The corners of my mouth curved into a profoundly sly, greedy smile. If I could get my hands on that kind of liquidity this early on, it would be a monumental, game-changing boost to my personal finances, and by extension, my path to devouring the empire. At the same time, a very specific, useful face surfaced vividly in my memories from my past life. It was a certain notorious, highly elusive thief from my glory days as Varlock, a bastard who had accidentally taught me a wide variety of tracking skills through our mutual target practices. Hurry up and find them, hurry up. Ah, I'm looking, so quit nagging me, you damn pest. Thanks to my endless bickering and hunts with that fellow, back then, I had become quite an expert at tracking down desperate runaways who thought they could disappear. I stared out the window, my eyes narrowing into lethal slits. Just you wait, you merchant bastards. Soon enough, I'll find exactly where you're hiding. Deep inside my heart, a literal devil was wearing a thoroughly sinister, unyielding smile. The next morning, the grand corridor of the Daphne mansion was filled with a rare, light-hearted sound. A middle-aged man, Viscount Cobalt, to be precise, was walking down the stone hallway, humming an oddly cutesy, buoyant tune that completely clashed with his massive, battle-hardened frame. Even when he came to a temporary halt to adjust his robes, the corners of his mouth kept uncontrollably twitching upward into a wide smile. The sole reason he was so incredibly elated was none other than the breathtaking feat I had accomplished the day before in the backyard. Truly admirable, Hardin. That troublesome, fragile son whom everyone in the domain had universally dismissed as a useless wastrel, a piece of trash, and a pathetic shut-in young master. Such a son had not only miraculously regained the mana they all thought he'd lost forever, but he had even gone on to utterly dominate and defeat the infamous great young master Donful, the feared steel serpent, in a high-stakes duel. It's simply unbelievable. Ha ha ha, oh ho ho ho. Yesterday, in the immediate aftermath of the fight, Cobalt had desperately wanted to rush straight to my room and shower me with endless praise. However, he had worried that I might be too physically exhausted to handle a long conversation, and he also feared that the surrounding retainers would find the sight of the Lord gushing over his son completely undignified. So, he had forced himself to hold back his explosive pride for a whole agonizing day. But the moment the sun began to rise this morning, his eyes flew open naturally. He could hardly wait another second to speak to me. Naturally, his ultimate destination was my private room. He wanted to look his son in the eye, offer profound praise for the great deed that had saved their lineage, and also finally clear up some massive, burning questions that had kept him awake all night. Hardin, just what kind of intense training did you actually do? When, how, and how much? I had lived for years as a helpless cripple, without a single shred of mana. For me to not only regain it overnight, but to then casually dismantle Donfell. To Cobalt, that alone was a certified miracle, something to be profoundly grateful to God Farron for. But as a seasoned knight himself, Cobalt was simply dying of curiosity. How exactly had I trained to achieve such flawless, predictive mechanics? Moreover, a deeper historical hope was swelling in his chest. If I can learn what kind of method he used, it might prove to be the ultimate breakthrough in finally restoring our lost wave swordsmanship. The wave swordsmanship, the legendary family style that he had fruitlessly devoted over a decade of his life trying to artificially revive. This hidden training method of mine might be the missing piece to bringing the Daphne sword back to absolute life. What should he ask me first? Perhaps he should start by offering a massive, lavish reward to properly commemorate such an achievement. Pride, relief, and immense anticipation mingled together, swelling beautifully in his chest as he approached the door. He vividly pictured an ideal, heartwarming scene in his mind. Father and son finally smiling, laughing, and chatting together like the old days. Suppressing his racing excitement, as best he could, he smoothed down his tunic and took the final steps. I'm here. Before he knew it, he was standing directly before my door. He wiped the goofy smile off his face, composed his features into a dignified expression, and knocked with measured effort. Knock, knock. Hardin, are you awake? He paused, tilting his ear toward the wood, but no reply came from within. Ham? Knock, knock, knock. Hardin? Knock, knock. Knock, 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 knock. He knocked again and again, his volume steadily increasing, but still, a heavy silence was the only thing that answered. Is there no one in there? He muttered to himself, his brow furrowing. No matter how many times he called out, the result remained entirely the same. Growing deeply puzzled, a sudden prickle of anxiety hitting his gut, Cobalt finally grabbed the cold brass doorknob and turned it. Creak! Thud! A completely empty, pristine room greeted his gaze. Harden? The bed was neatly made, the sheets pulled tight and crisp, looking exactly as if no one had ever slept in it last night. Cobalt stepped inside, his eyes scanning the vacant space in confusion, when he suddenly noticed a small, folded piece of parchment left directly atop the center of the blanket. Viscount Cobalt approached the bed with hesitant steps, reached down, and picked up the note. Unfolding it, his eyes locked onto the elegant, sweeping handwriting left behind. Gone to collect unpaid debts. Harden. Unpaid debts? Cobalt whispered the words aloud, staring blankly at the paper. What in the world did that mean? And why on earth had he vanished all of a sudden in the middle of the night? Viscount Cobalt's face instantly clouded over with a heavy, uneasy wave of deep suspicion. What specific element of Vinter's sheer panic, or the desolate forest setting, should be emphasized most when we begin writing the first part? The sun blazed relentlessly in the clear midday sky, casting harsh beams down into the dense, silent depths of a desolate forest. Swoosh! A grand, roaring waterfall cascaded refreshingly down a nearby mossy cliff face as wild birds chirped in the high canopy, completing a deceptively picturesque scene. Nestled right into the center of this clearing stood a solitary, rustic log cabin. At the center of that house, a middle-aged man with an incredibly ugly face resembling a bloated toad sat, entirely relaxed in a wooden rocking chair, mindlessly gulping down alcohol from a thick glass bottle. This is great, really great. The air is good, the scenery is absolutely good. The man's name was Vinter Palome. Until a few short months ago, he had been the official, wealthy owner of the prominent Vinter Merchant Guild, which used to serve as the main trading partner of the Daphne Viscounty. Now he wore a thoroughly blissful, greedy smile as he gazed out the window at the cascading waters. If I'd known it'd be a paradise like this, I'd have switched allegiances and betrayed them much sooner. Recently, he had eagerly accepted a lucrative under-the-table offer from the Calpion Viscounty and joined in a certain covert scheme. It would take far too long to explain all the gritty, underhanded details of the transaction. So to put it simply, it was entirely about utterly crushing and bankrupting the Daphne Viscounty, the very same house that served as the main client and historical lifeline of the Vinter Merchant Guild. It was exactly the sort of despicable, underhanded thing that honestly ought to prick a normal man's conscience, viciously, betraying a lifelong customer and benefactor. But to a rat like him, the final reward was simply too sweet to pass up. From now on, I've got nothing ahead of me but pure success and luxury. He had secured an ironclad, written promise of a coveted, lifetime appointment as a high-ranking administrator within the Calpion Viscounty's main estate. As long as he completed this specific isolation job properly without making a sound, he could spend the rest of his days enjoying political power, drinking wine, and flaunting his newfound status. The pathetic, groveling past it's entirely over now. How many miserable, grueling years had he wasted in poverty, forced to constantly grovel and bow his head before those arrogant Daphne bastards? He couldn't make any real money under their fair trade laws, which stressed him out. The constant financial stress made his greasy hair fall out in clumps, and losing all his hair meant he couldn't even find a decent woman to marry him. But if he could just transition into becoming a respected Calpion administrator, it'd all be solved in a flash. After all, women were always notoriously weak for high-status men who worked a powerful pen. Nothing seemed difficult or out of reach anymore. He just needed to hide out here, keep his head down in this desolate forest for a few more months without getting caught by those clueless Daphne bastards, and the assignment would be over. According to the courier who periodically brought him fresh supplies, the Daphne lot hadn't the faintest clue where he was. They were blindly scrambling to pay the debt. Well, of course they were. During his sudden disappearance, the entire resources of the Calpion Viscounty had been deployed to erase every single physical trace of his movement. Winter let out a hearty, booming laugh, tilting his head back. Ho 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 ho. This really is like swimming safely with your feet firmly on the ground. All I have to do is drink expensive liquor here, enjoy the pristine view, and watch my bank account grow while raking in the honey. Just then, did I finish it all already? When Winter tipped the bottle completely over his open mouth, only a few tepid drops fell out onto his tongue. Ch, what an absolute mood killer. He grumbled, forcing his fat frame up from the rocking chair, and tore open a few large wooden crates stacked heavily in the corner. But to his immense frustration, every single one of them was filled with nothing but empty glass bottles. Bah, whatever. They'll be coming soon enough anyway. Every 10 days, the Calpion people brought fresh supplies regularly like clockwork, so the alcohol would be restocked before long. Maybe I'll just take a nap to pass the time, Winter muttered, scratching his hairy belly as he started to lie down on the cot. Knock, knock, knock. Suddenly, someone knocked heavily on the cabin door. Key, they say even a lion appears when you speak of it. Winter's face instantly lit up with a massive smile as he spoke aloud. He thought it was the courier arriving early. Who's there? I've brought the supplies. Tap, tap. Winter stepped lightly over the wooden floorboards and flung the heavy cabin door wide open with a welcoming grin. Why'd you come so early this tea, huh? And right there, two entirely unexpected, terrifying figures were standing on his porch. The one standing directly in front was me, Harden Daphne, the eldest young master of the Daphne Viscounty. Godolph, this is Winter, right? I asked, tilting my head. Yes, it is, young master, a voice replied from beside me. Next to me, where I stood wearing a thoroughly sly, predatory smile, Gadolf, my loyal attendant, nodded his head in confirmation. What the hell? Damn it! Thud. Utterly startled out of his wits, Winter slammed the heavy wooden door shut with all his might and threw his weight against it, trying frantically to steady his hyperventilating breath. What? Why on earth is that broken bastard here? Thick sheets of cold sweat instantly beaded on Winter's toad-like forehead at the sudden, catastrophic crisis, and his face turned deathly pale. I knocked on the door again, the wood rattling on its hinges. Knock, knock, knock. Open the door, I commanded coldly from the other side. Jay, just a moment, Winter shrieked, his voice cracking. What should he do? Should he jump out the side window? But then where would he run to in this vast forest? Calpion? Or maybe... As Winter's frantic eyes darted around the cabin in a blind panic, searching for an escape route. Crack! Heek! A lone, mana-reinforced fist smashed violently clean through the center of the wooden door, punching straight into the room right past his face. Trying to run? I asked smoothly through the newly made hole. No, I couldn't afford to get caught now. If I got dragged back by these Daphne bastards, what would happen to my glorious administrator post? My dream of a high society marriage? Everything would evaporate into thin air. Winter trembled violently from head to toe, his eyes bulging as he bolted straight toward the rear window of the cabin. Creak! He flung the wooden shutters open with a desperate slam and was just about to leap out into the brush when... Wham! The cabin door, completely torn off its iron hinges by a vicious kick from behind, flew horizontally through the room and slammed heavily into his back, pinning him flat against the floorboards. Arg, it hurts my spine. Collapsed under the weight of the heavy door, Winter writhed in agony, screaming bloody murder as a cloud of dust settled around him. I walked slowly into the cabin, stepping right over the debris, and looked down at him, my voice dropping into a freezing, razor-sharp register. You absolute bastard. Did you really think you could run off into the woods after pocketing our money? Godolph stepped into the room right behind me, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Just thinking about all the horrific shit I had to go through because of this toad makes me tremble with fury, young master. Yeah, I muttered, cracking my knuckles. It was filthy, exhausting work tracking him down. As an explosive mixture of annoyance and dark fury rippled across our faces, Vinter frantically scrambled out from under the door, dragging himself onto his knees. He raised his hands in a desperate, trembling plea. "That is please, young master. I wasn't trying to steal from you. I can explain." "Don't give me that garbage," I snapped, ruthlessly cutting him off. "Anyone with working eyes can see you plan to hole up here and bolt the moment the heat died down." At my completely unyielding, knife-like tone, one that clearly didn't allow for a single scrap of excuse, Vinter looked up at me as if he were staring directly at a ghost. His lower jaw quivered violently as he finally forced out the burning question in his mind. "How did you even find this place?" The Calpion Viscounty was supposed to have completely erased his trail. They were a powerful, wealthy house. There shouldn't have been any mathematical way for the declining Daphne family to track his footsteps to a hidden cabin in the middle of a vast forest. So how on earth had this particular wastrel managed to stand on his porch? Vinter's eyes were practically brimming with existential disbelief. I leaned down slightly, letting a faint, highly sinister smile grace my lips, and answered curtly. "Trade secret." "What? Did you seriously think I was going to give you a roadmap?" I chuckled softly. The sheer shock of my casual attitude left Vinter completely paralyzed, his mouth flapping wordlessly like a fish out of water. I turned my head slightly away from the pathetic display and gestured with my chin. "Gadolf." "Yes, young master." "Tie him up tight." "With pleasure, sir." Gadolf snapped a sharp, enthusiastic salute, instantly whipping out a thick coil of coarse rope from his travel pack. He stepped forward and began binding Vinter's hands and feet together with aggressive efficiency. "Ah, it hurts. Ah, take it easy with the knots, you brute." "Shut your mouth, you treacherous rat. Acting like you're some innocent victim, you damn toad." Every single time Vinter so much as squirmed or tried to complain, Gadolf drove a heavy, closed fist straight down onto the crown of his skull with a dull thud. Good. The guy has learned my methods very well." I nodded in thorough satisfaction, a pleased, thoroughly relaxed smile spreading across my lips as I watched my attendant work. A little while later, the cabin was quiet again, save for a pathetic sniffling sound. Why me?" Vinter was now securely tied up like a prized pig, kneeling awkwardly on the hardwood floor with tears and snot streaming down his face. His eyes were bruised and swollen, nearly shut from Gadolf's corrections, and a colorful collection of massive lumps had sprouted all over his bald scalp. Truly an impressive, miserable sight. Satisfied that he wouldn't be making any sudden moves, I squatted down directly in front of him, grinning broadly as I asked the golden question. "Hey, where's the money?" "Money? What money?" Vinter croaked, trying to play dumb through his swollen lips. "Don't play games with me. The 300,000 gold you embezzled and ran off with. Where is it hiding?" Vinter flinched under my piercing gaze, his shoulders slumping in total defeat. It's hidden in that large cargo crate over there in the corner." I stood up and walked over to the stack of crates piled heavily in the shadows, prying them open one by one. The first few contained exactly what I expected: empty liquor bottles, iron rations, trashy chivalric romance novels, and survival gear. It was all a collection of items that made it painfully obvious he had fully intended to hole up in this isolation for months on end. And then, found it. The moment I popped the lid off the fourth crate, a brilliant gleam caught the light. Sitting inside were two pristine promissory notes legally stamped for 100,000 gold each, alongside a heavy, iron-banded chest overflowing to the brim with glittering gold coins. It was, without a shadow of a doubt, the exact funds he had maliciously borrowed from Calpion using our name. Beautiful. Just beautiful. An unstoppable, deeply greedy smile slipped onto my lips as I began gathering the notes and pulling the chest closer. Watching his retirement fund get systematically confiscated, Vinter squeezed his eyes shut and spoke up with a thoroughly aggrieved, indignant expression. "Sorry, but technically speaking, that money is still legally mine, if you take that without proper legal authority or a domain warrant." Hearing his absurd attempt at legal defense, I didn't even bother to look back. I just jerked my chin over my shoulder. Gadolf. Yes, sir. Gadolf snapped another prompt salute. Thud. Thump, thump, thump. Stop, mercy. Without a single drop of mercy, Gadolf immediately began beating Vinter black and blue all over again. A moment later, Gadolf stepped back, breathing slightly hard. I squatted back down in front of Vinter, who now lay sprawled out flat on the floorboards, his face looking like a thoroughly tenderized piece of meat. You bastard. Let me make one thing crystal clear, I said, patting his bruised cheek. This money isn't yours anymore. It is, though? Vinter wheezed desperately, a bubble of blood popping at the corner of his mouth. The Daphne lot were only my guarantors. Legally, the ownership of the liquid capital belongs to. We personally paid off all your debts on your behalf yesterday, I interrupted smoothly, a sharp grin cutting across my face. Which means, by the laws of subrogation, it's our money now. What are you saying? Paid it off? The Daphne house did? That enormous sum? Vinter's remaining good eye brimmed with absolute, unadulterated disbelief. I met his staggered gaze with an amused look. What? You think our family is too broke to handle a little debt? And no, that's not what I meant. Enough. Just know that's how the cookie crumbled. I stood up, thoroughly pleased with the haul. It looked like I'd taken absolutely everything worth taking from this rat's nest. I dusted off my traveling coat and was just about to turn on my heel to head out when… Thud! As I took a step back, my boot lightly bumped against a smaller, discreet wooden crate that had been sitting just out of my direct line of sight beneath the cot. Unlike the others, this one had a heavy iron padlock snapped tightly onto it, looking incredibly suspicious at a bare glance. What's this little prize, then? I murmured, tilting my head as I eyed it. The exact moment my eyes locked onto that box, Vinter's face drained of what little color it had left. His eyes flew wide open in sheer horror, and he practically shrieked like a banshee. Don't touch that. You've already taken all the gold. That box is my strictly confidential, personal property. Oh, really? I turned back to him, my smile turning sharp. Well, I suppose it might be. I stared intently at the lock, then casually jerked my chin toward Gadolf again. Gadolf's face instantly split into a broad, menacing grin. You treacherous bastard. If the young master wants to check something, he checks it. No exceptions. Thunk. He cracked Vinter squarely on the top of the skull with his fist yet again. This is fine, right, young master? Gadolf asked, turning to me with an eager smile. You didn't really need to hit him that time, though, I muttered, letting out a soft sigh. Come on now, sir. Better to be thorough in these isolated environments. That guy, he's surprisingly rough around the edges when he gets going, I thought, shaking my head with a brief chuckle. Well, let's see what we have here. While Gadolf pinned the groaning Vinter firmly to the floorboards, I knelt by the locked box. Reaching into the inner lining of my coat, I pulled out two slender, professional iron lockpicks I had kept from my past life. I deftly inserted them into the keyhole. Clack, click, clack, clunk. My fingers remembered the tension perfectly. It took less than 10 seconds for the heavy iron lock to snap completely open. And no, please don't look, Vinter sobbed from the floor. I think I will, I replied smoothly. Leaving the struggling, pathetic merchant behind, I flipped the heavy lid of the crate wide open. I blinked in surprise. Inside, there wasn't a hidden stash of precious gems, rare artifacts, or extra gold coins. Instead, it was filled to the brim with neatly organized, stacked bundles of thick, crisp parchment paper. I reached inside and lifted one of the heavy bundles in my hand, my eyes scanning the dense columns of ink. Ledgers, I thought, my brow furrowing. Why on earth was a runaway merchant treating a bunch of financial records like sacred locked relics? Rustle, rustle, rustle. As I rapidly flipped through the dense pages, my eyes searching for a pattern, Vinter cried out in a panicked, cracking voice. I told you, those are just personal papers, accounts of past trades. They're completely worthless to you. I ignored his screaming entirely, my fingers flying through the sheets. How many pages had I turned by then? 50? 80? Flip, Suddenly, from between the thick accounting bundles, a single, separate sheet of high-quality parchment slipped loose and fell onto my lap. "What's this secret little document?" I murmured, picking it up. The moment my fingers touched that specific paper, Vinter shrieked as if he were having a violent physical seizure. "It's nothing important. It's a junk draft. Don't read that, young master. Please." "You think telling me not to read it is going to stop me? It only makes me want to memorize it." Completely ignoring the hysterical, screaming toad on the floor, I flattened the paper out and began to read the crisp, elegant script written across the top. Contract. Vinter Palome, master of the Vinter Merchant Guild, and the Calpion Viscounty, before the radiant god Pharaon, hereby enter into the following binding agreement. The detailed terms of this contract are as follows. I scanned the terms, and my expression instantly froze. What the hell is this? The contents were brutally, elegantly simple. It laid out a quid pro quo. If Vinter Palome successfully carried out the Calpion Viscounty's specific administrative request regarding his clients, the Calpion House would officially hire him as a high-ranking, lifetime administrator within their main estate. And the formal date stamped at the bottom of the agreement was right before his sudden disappearance. A deep, cold realization hit me. This entire situation stank. It stank to the high heavens. I pressed my fingers firmly into my forehead, a dark, dangerous aura beginning to leak from my body as I slowly turned my gaze back to the shivering merchant. "Hey, you," I muttered, my voice dropping into a lethal whisper. "This whole bankruptcy thing. You deliberately set it up from the very beginning with the Calpion bastards, didn't you?"